Chapter 836. The White Little Fellow. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned. The trump card left behind by the sword sect's founding ancestor is a little fellow? As soon as the little fellow emerged, she rubbed her drowsy eyes and stretched herself. Meanwhile, she suddenly opened her eyes and gazed at Yi Xian, and her eyes instantly opened wide when she saw Yi Xian. Her entire body shuddered, and then she turned around and ran. Everyone here was stunned when they witnessed this scene. She ran? Just like that? The experts of the sword sect felt like their brains had short-circuited. At this moment, the little white thing suddenly stopped. She turned around to look at Yi Xian, who was not far away. She blinked. She suddenly recalled why she should be afraid. It wasn't him. The white little fellow floated over to Yi Xian. The black-clothed old man hesitated for a moment before he said, "Your Highness, he trespassed into our sword sect and killed members of our sword sect." The white little fellow suddenly stretched out a claw at the black-clothed old man, and she signaled him to keep quiet. The black-clothed old man was at a loss for words. The white little fellow glanced at Yi Xian, and then Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword and slashed. At this moment, he actually didn't recognize anyone. No, apart from Yi Ling, who was on his back, he really didn't recognize anyone else. As for Yi Ling, he couldn't say that he recognized Yi Ling as well. It could only be said that Yi Ling was his final strand of obsession. The white little fellow blinked when she saw Yi Xian attack, and then she waved her claw. A white sword appeared in her grasp, and then she raised it horizontally to block Yi Xian's attack. Bang! This sword, she actually blocked it directly. The members of the sword sect were overjoyed when they witnessed this scene. She blocked it. At first, they thought that this cute little guy came out to act cute, but now it seemed that he had the strength. After the little white fellow blocked Yi Xian with her sword, she did not counterattack. Instead, she gently waved her left claw, and a white aura enveloped Yi Xian. Under the cover of this white aura, the hostility and killing intent on Yi Xian's body gradually disappeared. All the experts of the sword sect were stunned once more when they witnessed this scene. What was he doing? Gradually, the redness in Yi Xian's eyes faded, and he regained some clarity. The instant Yi Xian regained some consciousness, he was stunned for a moment. But soon, he seemed to have thought of something, and he suddenly put Yi Ling down from his back. When he saw that Yi Ling was no longer breathing, his face instantly twisted, and he turned to look at the experts from the sword sect. Boom! A bloody light swept out from his body. Just as he regained a sliver of clarity, he instantly reverted back to normal. The energy of his bloodline erupted madly once more. The white little fellow blinked when she witnessed this scene, and then she hurriedly waved her claw again. In next to no time, Yi Xian was enveloped by countless strands of white light, and the hostility and killing intent Yi Xian emanated were suppressed once more. When a trace of clarity returned to Yi Xian's eyes, the white little fellow hurriedly flew over to Yi Ling, pointed at Yi Ling, and then pointed at herself. Yi Xian was stunned by this scene, and then he said hoarsely, What are you trying to say?" The little fellow gazed at Yi Ling, and it didn't take long for a wisp of surprise to flash through her eyes. After that, she placed her claw lightly on Yi Ling's head, and then countless strands of dark violet energy surged out from her claw. It didn't take long for Yi Ling to be enveloped by the violet energy. Yi Xian gazed at Yi Ling while his body trembled slightly. A short while passed, but there was still no movement from Yi Ling. The white little fellow's brows knit together slightly, and there was a trace of bewilderment in her large eyes. Right at this moment, Yi Xian's eyes suddenly became deathly still. Impossible. As he spoke, he gazed at the white little fellow. "Bury me with my younger sister later." As soon as he finished speaking, bang! Yi Xian was instantly covered in blood, and then he transformed into a ray of blood-red light that charged towards the experts of the sword sect. The white little fellow stomped her claws anxiously when she saw Yi Xian become covered in blood again. She wanted to chase after Yi Xian, but she seemed to have thought of something and lowered her head to look at Yi Ling instead. She knew that she had to save this woman, otherwise, even if Yi Xian recovered, he would immediately become covered in blood. But why can't I save her? The white little fellow's eyes were filled with bewilderment. A short while later, she seemed to have noticed something, and her eyes lit up. She placed her right claw on Yi Ling's abdomen and pressed down lightly. With this, Yi Ling's body instantly became illusory, and then a mysterious aura suddenly seeped out from her body. The little fellow sniffed lightly and soon, she became slightly excited. Then, she pressed down lightly with her little claw again. At this moment, Yi Ling's brows were slightly knitted together. The little fellow noticed this, and she hurriedly mobilized a large amount of purple qi, which was madly absorbed by Yi Ling. Seeing this, a bright smile appeared on the little fellow's chubby little face, and then she started transferring the purple qi again. In the distance, Yi Xian had already gone berserk. At this moment, no one could stop Yi Xian, especially the swordsmen before him. These swordsmen were completely helpless against Yi Xian, and they could only wait to be slaughtered. To a certain extent, Yi Xian was the swordsman's nemesis. At this moment, a voice resounded in the sword hall again. Use the second box. The second box. Below, the old man in black did not hesitate this time. He once again formed a sword seal, and soon, the ground not far behind him suddenly left, and then a black box floated out. The second trump card. The old man in black glanced at the white little fellow not far away, and his expression was extremely ugly. He did not expect that the helper he called out would actually help Yi Xian. Not only did he not expect this, but the entire sword sex powerhouses also did not expect this. This white little fellow actually helped Yi Xian save someone. At this moment, they had no time to think about this because the sword was already too fast. Not only was the sword fast, but it was also boundlessly strong. Executing Heaven Sword. At present, it could be said to be the sharpest sword in the four-dimensional universe. In his current state, no one was a match for Yi Xian's sword. As soon as the box was opened, a powerful aura emanated from within it. Yi Xian immediately stopped attacking, and then he gazed at the box. A ray of black light suddenly floated out from within it. The surviving swordsman gazed at the ray of black light. The black light dispersed to reveal a little girl. She had 2 horns on her head, and a black tail behind her. Hope appeared in the eyes of all the experts of the sword sect when they saw her. She was formidable. The aura she emanated was too formidable. Just his aura alone had forced Yi Xian to stop the evil aura and killing intent emanating from him. Not only that, but everyone present had even felt a formless pressure. She was formidable. That was the first thought that came to everyone's mind. The little girl stretched her back, and then she suddenly gazed at Yi Xian who stood nearby. She was slightly stunned when she saw Yi Xian, and then she said, "You." Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of her, and he swiftly slashed his sword at her. The little girl didn't dodge, and just allowed Yi Xian's sword to strike her head. Bang! Everyone watched as Yi Xian's figure was blasted flying. The other swordsmen were petrified when they witnessed this scene. She took a strike from Yi Xian head-on? And she's even fine? Everyone was looking at the little girl, and their hearts were filled with shock. After all, they'd witnessed Yi Xian's sword. Yi Xian's strength was extremely formidable, and it was especially so for Yi Xian's sword. That sword was extremely sharp. However, the little girl had actually used her head to take a strike from Yi Xian's sword, and remained fine. The little girl rubbed her head, and then she gazed at the Executing Heaven sword in Yi Xian's hand. Executing Heaven sword. As she spoke, she gazed at Yi Xian. Why have you become like this as well? Yi Xian didn't speak. He just appeared in front of the little girl again, and then he slashed his sword at her again. This time he'd utilized the boundless sword. The expressions of everyone in the surroundings instantly changed when they saw this attack. However, the little girl didn't attack, and she just allowed the sword to strike her head. Bang! The space around Yi Xian and the little girl collapsed. Moreover, a powerful force swept out like a storm, and the experts of the sword sect hurriedly retreated. When they stopped moving, they gazed at the little girl. At this moment, the little girl was still completely fine. Conversely, Yi Xian's sword in hand were actually trembling violently. The others instantly heaved sighs of relief when they witnessed this scene. Meanwhile, Yi Xian was about to attack again. However, the little girl suddenly grabbed Executing Heaven sword, and then she kicked Yi Xian's stomach. As if she'd thought of something, she suddenly withdrew her leg and moved over 10 and back to put some distance between her and Yi Xian. On the other hand, the executing heaven sword in Yi Xian's hand suddenly transformed into a ray of light that slashed at the little girl. The little girl immediately grabbed onto executing heaven sword, and she forcefully resisted the powerful force contained within it. The little girl glanced at Yi Xian, and then she gazed at the little fellow who was standing not too far away. "Bye, heal him." The little white fellow blinked, and then she pointed at Yi Ling. The little girl nodded. "All right." As she spoke, she turned around, and then her brows knit together slightly. The sword sect. When she spoke up to this point, she gazed at Yi Xian. "Why are you fighting the sword sect?" Yi Xian didn't speak, and he was just about to attack again. Meanwhile, the little girl suddenly charged over to Yi Xian, and then she pressed her palm against Yi Xian's shoulder. In an instant, the vicious energy and killing intent that Yi Xian emanated were instantly suppressed by her. It didn't take long for Yi Xian to regain his senses. Meanwhile, the black-clothed old man, the swordsman, suddenly appeared in front of the little girl. He didn't attack the little girl, and he just smashed his fist towards Yi Xian's head with the intention of killing Yi Xian with a single strike. However, right when his fist was about to smash against Yi Xian's head, the little girl suddenly smashed her fist towards the old man. The old man's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly withdrew his fist to block it. Bang! The old man was instantly blasted flying, and his arms even exploded apart. The experts of the sword sect were stunned on the spot when they witnessed this scene. What's going on? Chapter 837. The old man was stunned by the little girl's punch as well. What's the meaning of this? All the experts of the sword sect gazed at the little girl in succession. Is she a helper from our sect? She's probably Yi Xian's helper, right? The old man stared fixedly at the little girl, and he clenched his fists tightly. Aren't you supposed to be protecting my sword sect? He was furious. Extremely furious. That white little fellow had helped Yi Xian earlier, and now this little girl was helping Yi Xian as well. What's going on? The little girl glanced at the old man. Why did all of you hit him? Don't all of you know that he's my older brother's subordinate? My older brother's subordinate? The old man frowned slightly. What do you mean? The little girl pointed angrily at the old man. Why did all of you hit him? Hearing this, the black-clothed old man was dumbfounded. Why did we hit Yi Xian? His mind was completely short-circuited. Is this the trump card that the sword sect's founding ancestor left behind for the sword sect? The experts of the sword sect were in a state of confusion as well. What's going on? Is this the sword sect's helper or Yi Xian's? Meanwhile, a nearby swordsman stepped forward, and he forcefully suppressed the rage in his heart. Didn't you see that? It was he who slaughtered in my sword sect, and it wasn't my sword sect that hit him. The little girl gazed at Yi Xian. Meanwhile, Xiao Linger suddenly appeared in front of the little girl, and she hurriedly told her everything. A short moment later, the little girl glanced at Yi Ling, and her expression gradually turned cold. After that, she turned around to look at the nearby swordsman. All of you hit his younger sister first. The swordsman's expression was slightly unsightly. Who exactly are you helping? The little girl suddenly stomped her right foot against the ground. Bang! The swordsman's body exploded apart before he could even react. The swordsman's expression changed drastically when they saw this. The little girl glanced coldly at the experts of the sword sect. You actually dared to hit my younger sister? How shameless! Moreover, the people you beat up are my brother's people. The black-clothed old man coldly looked at the little girl. Who is your brother? The little girl pointed at the statue not far away. He's my brother. Seeing this scene, the black-robed old man and the others were stunned. Wasn't this their patriarch? Meanwhile, a swordsman spoke solemnly. That's the founding ancestor of our sword sect. Since he's your elder brother, why don't you help us? The little girl looked at the swordsman. I've calculated your relationship with my brother, and his relationship with my brother. I realized that he's closer to my brother, so I'll help him. Everyone. The black-robed old man slowly clenched his fists. You said that he is closer to your brother. Why do you say that? The little girl shrugged. Anyway, they're closer. The black-clothed old man spoke solemnly. He intends to kill us. The little girl said. Then let him kill us. The black-clothed old man almost spat out a mouthful of blood when he heard this. Let him kill us. My God. What did I just say? At this moment, the black-clothed old man felt like his brain wasn't enough to comprehend all of this. Suddenly, Yi Xian, who stood by the little girl's side, gazed at the black-clothed old man. A moment later, he transformed into a ray of light that shot explosively towards the black-clothed old man. The black-clothed old man's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene. How could he dare to resist Yi Xian's attack? He immediately retreated madly. However, Yi Xian didn't pursue him, and Yi Xian went after the other experts of the sword sect instead. It didn't take long for numerous shrill cries to resound once more. They couldn't stop Yi Xian at all. Yi Xian. Yi Xian's sword was too terrifying. The little girl blinked, hesitated for a moment and said, "Why don't we sit down and have a chat?" Yi Xian ignored her and continued killing. The little girl thought for a moment and said, "Don't injure yourself." As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and walked towards the white little fellow. Yi Xian was still slaughtering in the distance. While the experts of the sword sect were resisting him, their swords couldn't pose a threat to Yi Xian at all. Even some of the formidable sword formations of the sword sect were unable to harm Yi Xian. Yi Xian was the bane of the swordsman, or it should be said that he was the bane of the sword sect. If he encountered any other sect, then Yi Xian would absolutely not slaughter them so wantonly, because while his combat strength was formidable, the joint forces of 7 or 8 experts at the peak of the Shattering Realm would definitely be able to suppress him. However, the Fate Realm experts of the sword sect felt extremely helpless. They felt extremely helpless because their swords were useless against Yi Xian. On the other hand, the little girl had walked over to the white little fellow. The white little fellow pointed at Yi Ling, who was lying on the ground, with an excited expression on her face. The little girl looked at Yi Ling and blinked. In next to no time, a wisp of surprise flashed through her eyes. When she noticed the little girl, the white little fellow hurriedly waved her little claws, as if she was trying to express something. The little girl nodded slightly. What a unique physique. It's amazing. The white little fellow hurriedly nodded in agreement. The little girl looked at the white little fellow. Give her some more violet energy, and completely activate her physique. The white little fellow nodded. And then she continued instilling violet energy into Yi Ling. On the other side, Yi Xian had gone mad from the slaughter. At this moment, Yi Xian was enveloped by countless strands of blood energy, and everywhere he passed, heads would fall to the ground. It was truly a bloodbath. Yi Xian's target was the sword sect's sword hall. In other words, the swordsman's location. However, the sword sect's experts were resisting tenaciously, and they were trying to delay until the swordsman came out, the current strongest expert of the sword sect. At this moment, a voice suddenly resounded from within the sword hall. Everyone, retreat to the front of the sword hall, and activate the defensive sword formation. The voice of the swordsman. Hearing this, all the sword sect's experts retreated. When they retreated to the front of the sword hall, a huge barrier of light suddenly enveloped the entire sword hall. This barrier of light wasn't formed by sword energy, which meant that Yi Xian couldn't absorb it at all. In front of the sword hall were the sword sect's experts, and there were only a few dozen of them. Outside the sword hall was Yi Xian, and the ground around Yi Xian was covered in blood and corpses. Yi Xian was surrounded by a bloody glow, and the executing heaven sword in his hand was horribly red, as if it was forged from blood. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly walked to the barrier of light and slashed down. Bang! The barrier of light shook violently, and countless cracks appeared on it. However, it didn't shatter. Yi Xian slashed down again. Rumble! The barrier of light shook once more, and the cracks grew larger. However, it still stood firm. Yi Xian was about to attack again, when he suddenly transformed into a ray of light that vanished into the distance. The swordsmen were slightly stunned by this scene. What's Yi Xian trying to do? In next to no time, all of them seemed to have thought of something, and their expressions changed drastically. One of the swordsmen spoke with horror. His targets are the disciples of our sword sect. He'd just finished speaking when the howl of swords resounded from afar. The black-clothed old man who led the group roared furiously, Yi Xian, you think you can do that? Come at us. Yi Xian didn't even pay attention to him, and he just slaughtered the disciples of the sword sect. How could these disciples of the sword sect be a match for Yi Xian? They couldn't fight back at all. Yi Xian immediately started slaughtering, and shrill cries resounded incessantly. On the other hand, the experts of the sword sect who were trapped within the barrier of light had extremely unsightly expressions on their faces. They wanted to leave the barrier, but they were very clearly aware that it would be useless even if they did, because they couldn't stop Yi Xian. Yi Xian was still slaughtering. At this point, he'd killed a few dozen, and all of them were genius disciples of the sword sect. Even though they weren't strong enough right now, they were the future hope of the sword sect. At this moment, the black-clothed old man in the light shield suddenly rushed out. The black-clothed old man glared at Yi Xian in the distance. Both of his hands had been chopped off by the little girl, so he had no hands at the moment. However, there was not a hint of fear in the black-robed old man's eyes. The black-clothed old man walked slowly towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian, do you only attack the weak? You. His voice suddenly stopped abruptly. This was because a blood-red sword had been stabbed into his throat at some point in time. It was an instant kill. The black-clothed old man's eyes were filled with disbelief. He intended to say something, but Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of him. And then Yi Xian swung the execution heaven sword horizontally. Hiss! The black-clothed old man's head flew into the air. After he beheaded the black-clothed old man, Yi Xian transformed into a ray of blood-red light that shot towards the barrier of light, and then he swung his sword down. Bang! The barrier of light shook violently, and then countless cracks appeared on it. Yi Xian didn't waste his breath at all. He just swung his sword a few more times in succession, and more cracks appeared on the barrier of light. The expressions of the experts of the sword sect, who were trapped within the barrier of light, had changed when they witnessed this scene. Once the barrier of light was destroyed, then could anyone stop Yi Xian? No one. Defend the formation. Meanwhile, Jian Mu's voice resounded once more within the hall. The others hurriedly utilized their sword energy to defend the formation. When they heard Jian Mu, they didn't dare allow their sword energy to leave the barrier of light, because it would be absorbed by Yi Xian if it left the barrier of light. Just like that, Yi Xian continued slashing madly for around 15 minutes. Even though the barrier of light was covered in countless cracks, it still didn't shatter. The members of the sword sect instantly heaved sighs of relief when they witnessed this scene. Right at this moment, the space between Yi Xian's brows suddenly flashed. In the next moment, the space here started to reform layer by layer. The spatial Dao Law. Under the influence of the spatial Dao Law, the barrier of light actually started to disintegrate bit by bit. The expressions of the experts of the sword sect changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and they retreated explosively. It didn't take long for the barrier of light to vanish without a trace. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. At the instant he vanished, a blood-red ray of light slashed through the air. Hiss! The swordsman experts who led the group were instantly beheaded. Yi Xian was just about to continue attacking when an invisible pressure suddenly swept out from within the hall. Bang! Yi Xian was instantly blasted back by this aura, and he retreated until he stood before the little girl and the white fellow. An old man walked over from afar. It was none other than Jian Mu. At this moment, Jian Mu had recovered his physical body. Jian Mu walked slowly towards Yi Xian, with an extremely gloomy expression on his face. The little girl who stood by Yi Xian's side suddenly gazed at the white fellow. I'll go help him. As soon as she finished speaking, she stood up. P.S. The weather has suddenly turned cold, and it's brightening later than usual. Chapter 838. She walked over to Yi Xian's side, but Yi Xian immediately slashed his sword at her. However, the little girl pressed her hand down on his shoulder, and this action instantly suppressed the energy of his bloodline. However, it was only temporarily suppressed, and hadn't been completely suppressed. The little girl gazed at Jian Mu, and the latter spoke in a low voice. Both of you are trump cards left behind by the founding ancestor of my sword sect. Logically speaking, both of you should be protecting my sword sect, right? The little girl asked. Why did both of you hit him? Obviously, she was referring to Yi Xian. Jianmu gazed at her. You know him? The little girl nodded. I do. Jianmu's eyes narrowed slightly. You actually know him? Why? The little girl was just about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly started trembling, and the energy of his bloodline grew stronger and stronger. The little girl's brows knit together slightly. Meanwhile, Jianmu said, How did you know him? The little girl glanced at Jianmu. Let me ask you a question. Did you hit his younger sister? Jianmu gazed at her. Yes. The little girl flared up with rage. How shameless. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly swung her fist through the air. Jianmu's expression changed, and he swiftly slashed with his sword. Bang! In an instant, Jianmu was blasted flying. Moreover, the sword hall behind him was instantly transformed into powder. The others in the surroundings were astounded when they witnessed this scene. That little girl's strength is actually so formidable. Jianmu's face was covered in astonishment as well. He hadn't expected that the little girl's strength would actually be so terrifying. That punch had directly injured his internal organs. The little girl glanced at Jianmu with an emotionless expression. You hit his younger sister. How shameless. Jianmu's expression was extremely unsightly. Why are both of you helping him? He couldn't figure it out. Both the little girl and the white fellow were trump cards left behind by the Sword Sect's founding ancestor, and the Sword Sect had never utilized them. If it wasn't for the sake of keeping Yi Xian busy just now, the Sword Sect wouldn't have utilized them as well. However, he didn't expect that these two little fellas would actually help Yi Xian. Help Yi Xian? Why was that? The little girl took out a stick of candied hawthorn and licked it before saying, He's one of us. I don't know you. When he spoke up to hear, he paused slightly and said, That Lin Chi, where's little Lin? Jianmu's pupils suddenly constricted when he heard this. Lynch. Actually, the Sword Sect wasn't founded by the green-clothed man. It was founded by Lin Chi. However, after Lin Chi founded the Sword Sect, he directly appointed the green-clothed man as the founding ancestor. So the entire Sword Sect had no choice but to acknowledge the green-clothed man as the founding ancestor. However, the real founder of the Sword Sect was Lynch. Jianmu never imagined that this little girl actually knew Lin Chi, and even called him Little Lin. Who was this person in front of them? The more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. Jianmu was just about to speak when the little girl suddenly said, You wanted to seize his treasures, but you couldn't do anything to him. So you went to deal with his younger sister, right? Everyone in the surroundings gazed at Jianmu when they heard this. Actually, most of the members of the Sword Sect weren't aware of the sequence of events. They only knew that Yi Xian had come to the Sword Sect to kill. But they didn't know why Yi Xian had come to the Sword Sect to kill. Yet now, the little girl's words allowed them to understand that Yi Xian hadn't come to kill for no reason. Jianmu gazed at the little girl. I shouldn't have let you out. At this moment, he was truly regretful. He didn't regret going against Yi Xian, and he regretted letting this little girl and that white-colored little fellow out. Especially this little girl. This little girl's strength was too terrifying. The little girl laughed coldly when she heard Jianmu. You dared to touch Brother Yang's people? Looks to me like you're tired of living. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly vanished on the spot. Jianmu's expression instantly changed drastically when he witnessed this scene. He suddenly took a step forward while he pressed his palms together. And then an energy sword that was over 10 m long suddenly condensed above him. In the next moment, the energy sword carried an obliterating force as it slashed down forcefully. Meanwhile, the little girl just happened to appear in front of him, and she smashed her fist forward. Bang! The energy sword exploded apart. At the same time, Jianmu was blasted flying, and the little girl smashed her fist forward once more. Bang! In the distance, Jianmu's entire body had been sent flying thousands of meters away, and the space in front of her and Jianmu had already turned pitch black. The might of a single punch was so formidable. The expressions of the experts of the Sword Sect were extremely unsightly. Yi Xian was already sufficiently terrifying, but this little girl was even more terrifying than Yi Xian. The little girl was about to attack again when Jianmu suddenly spoke fiercely. What? Do you want my Sword Sect to be annihilated? The little girl's beautiful brows knit together slightly when she heard this. And then she stopped. Annihilate the sword sect? She hadn't thought of that. After all, the sword sect had acknowledged her older brother as its founding ancestor. It wouldn't be good to annihilate it just like that. Jianmu heaved a slight sigh of relief when he saw the little girl hesitate. He wasn't really afraid of Yi Xian, but he was really quite afraid of the little girl. After all, her strength was truly too terrifying. Most importantly, her defenses were extremely formidable. Her physical defenses were formidable to an extremely terrifying degree, and there were probably very few people in the fourth dimension who could penetrate her defenses. Suddenly the little girl said, "I've thought of a way." Jianmu gazed at her, and the little girl stared back at him. "I'll kill you, and then..." As she spoke, she pointed at Yi Xian. "Then make him the sect master of the sword sect." Jianmu was speechless. Everyone else was speechless. Make Yi Xian the sect master? The more she thought about it, the more she felt that it was a good idea. So she gazed at Jianmu. "But I have to kill you before that. Otherwise, he might not be able to become the sect master." As soon as she finished speaking, she was about to attack. However, a formidable aura suddenly emanated from Yi Xian. The little girl's brows knit together slightly when she witnessed this scene, because she noticed that she was slightly unable to suppress Yi Xian's bloodline. The energy of that bloodline was attacking her strength once more. If she were to attack, then that bloodline would erupt once more. The little girl thought for a moment, and then she gazed at the white fellow who stood not too far away. "Should I heal him first?" The white fellow blinked, and then she pointed her little claw lightly at Yuling obviously. What she meant was that she couldn't spare her claw right now. The little girl gazed at Yi Xian with a slightly helpless expression. She had to suppress Yi Xian's bloodline right now. Otherwise, if she didn't, then Yi Xian might kill everyone in the sword sect. That wasn't something she wanted to see happen. She only wanted to kill Jianmu, and then give the position of sword sect leader to Yi Xian. In this way, it would be the best of both worlds. Right at this moment, Jianmu suddenly opened his palm, and then he pressed it down lightly. A ray of white light shot out from the ruins of the sword hall. A ray of white light suddenly shot into the sky. Everyone looked at the ray of white light, because it was the sword sect's final trump card. Actually, all the experts of the sword sect were slightly panicked. What would they do if their final trump card helped Yi Xian as well? What should they do? They would only be doomed. The little girl gazed at the ray of white light as well, and there was a trace of bewilderment in her eyes. Suddenly, her pupils constricted slightly, and then she pulled Yi Xian behind her and smashed her fist forward. At the instant that the little girl's fist collided with the ray of white light, a fine and imperceptible ray of light suddenly flew out from within the ray of white light. Bang! The little girl took Yi Xian with her as she retreated explosively. The space where Yi Xian and she retreated was instantly obliterated, and both Yi Xian and her retreated by over 10 kilometers. The others in the surroundings were shocked when they witnessed this scene, and they gazed at the ray of white light. However, they were unable to see anything at all. The white little fellow was gazing at the ray of white light as well, and there was a trace of bewilderment in her eyes. The little girl stopped moving, and she glanced at her fist. Her fist had turned red. On the other side, Jianmu's face was extremely gloomy when he witnessed this scene. He hadn't imagined that the little girl's physical body would actually be strong to such an extent. The little girl gazed at the ray of white light in the sky, and there was nothing within it. She couldn't see anything at all. The little girl slowly clenched her right fist. "It wasn't left behind by my older brother." When she spoke up to hear, she gazed at Jianmu. "It's the energy of another world." Another world. Jianmu stared fixedly at the little girl. "You actually know of another world?" The little girl grunted coldly. She put away the candied fruit in her left hand, and then she slowly clenched her fists. Right at this moment, the ray of white light in the sky suddenly shook, and then the little girl suddenly pushed her arms forward. Bang! The space around the little girl and Yi Xian collapsed. At the same time, a strand of blood-red flames instantly enveloped the little girl and Yi Xian. Jianmu stared fixedly at that area in the distance. Right at this moment, a formidable force suddenly erupted from that area. and then the blood-red flames surged towards the surroundings. Everywhere the flames passed, space was instantly incinerated into nothingness. Meanwhile, the little girl walked over with Yi Xian in her hand. She was still utilizing a portion of her energy to suppress Yi Xian's bloodline. Jianmu's expression instantly turned gloomy when he saw the little girl, because he noticed that the blood-red flames actually hadn't harmed the little girl at all. She wasn't in her main body. How terrifying would she be if her main body was here? Jianmu didn't dare imagine it. Meanwhile, the little girl suddenly raised her head to gaze at the white light, and then she suddenly smashed her fist upwards. Bang! The white light trembled violently, and an invisible power surged out of it. This power actually shattered the little girl's power. Not only that, but it also arrived in front of the little girl. The little girl smashed her fist forward once more. Bang! The force was directly blasted apart while the white light in the sky merely trembled slightly. Yet it wasn't damaged at all. Jianmu stared fixedly at the little girl and said, "You can't stop it." The little girl glanced coldly at Jianmu and said, "Have I ever feared anyone?" Meanwhile, the little white fellow suddenly waved her little claw and seemed to be saying something. The little girl fell silent for a moment before she said, "Besides my big sister and my older brother, and that woman, have I ever feared anyone? Ha!" The Virtuous Swordsman. Chapter 839. When had she ever been afraid of anyone? Besides those 3 people that she'd spoken about, she'd never been afraid of anyone. Even if the ray of white light before her was the energy of another world. Jianmu laughed ferociously when he heard the little girl. "All right, then let me see how monstrous you are." As soon as he finished speaking, he moved aside. Meanwhile, the ray of white light in the sky suddenly started trembling. The little girl gazed at it. "White, can you heal this fellow first? Otherwise, I won't be able to exert my full strength." She was using most of her strength to suppress Yi Xian's bloodline. Snowy shook her head instead. She couldn't leave Yi Ling right now, because numerous mysterious auras had appeared on Yi Ling, and Yi Ling was still madly absorbing her violet energy. If her violet energy was cut off, then all her efforts would be in vain. "I can't leave." At the same time, her body had started to gradually become illusory, because she was madly transferring violet energy to Yi Ling. The little girl puckered her lips. How troublesome. Meanwhile, the ray of white light suddenly trembled, and then a snow-white ray of light suddenly slashed down from within it. At the instant that this ray of light appeared, the space here had instantly become illusory. No, the entire sword dimension had become illusory. It couldn't endure the might of this ray of light. The little girl's eyes narrowed slightly. "I can't be bothered with you anymore." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly transformed into a ray of black light that shot into the sky. She didn't swing her fist, and she just smashed her head against the ray of light. In next to no time, the ray of light slashed against her pair of black horns. Bang! The ray of light instantly exploded apart. However, the little girl was blasted back to the spot by the powerful force within the ray of light. Bang! The ground where the little girl stood exploded apart. At the same time, her body gradually became illusory as well. It was a consumption. Both she and the white fellow weren't in their true forms. So, every single time they utilized their strength, it was a form of consumption to them. Without the support of their true forms, they would vanish once the consumption increased. A savage smile arose on the corners of Jianmu's mouth when he saw the little girl's body gradually become illusory. "Aren't you very good at fighting? Continue." The little girl glanced at Jianmu. "I'll kill you first." As soon as she finished speaking, she disappeared on the spot. In the distance, Jianmu's expression changed. He waved his right hand, and a wave of sword light rippled out from his hand. However, this stretch of sword light was directly shattered by the little girl's fist. Not only that, but he was also blasted away by this powerful force. The little girl was about to attack again when another saber light flew out from the white light in the sky. The little girl suddenly raised her head and punched upwards. Boom! The saber light exploded and turned into nothingness. The little girl's body became even more illusory. Sensing this, the little girl slightly frowned. In the air, another saber light slashed down. The little girl looked up and punched out. Just like that, as more and more saber lights appeared, the little girl's body became more and more illusory. In the end, she was almost transparent. At this moment, the little girl suddenly stopped. She looked at the white light in the distance. "I'm so angry." As she spoke, she gazed at the white little fellow, and she was just about to speak when her figure vanished. The white little fellow blinked, and her body had become completely illusory. She looked down at Yi Ling, and then she suddenly opened her mouth and spat. Countless strands of violet energy surged madly from her mouth, and they surged into Yi Ling's body. After Yi Ling's body madly absorbed the violet energy, she suddenly clenched her fists tightly. However, the white little fellow was growing more and more illusory. Meanwhile, Jianmu suddenly gazed at Yi Ling. As he gazed at Yi Ling, who was lying on the ground, a strand of uneasiness suddenly arose in his heart, and it was growing stronger and stronger. Danger. Terror. That was what he felt right now. He didn't have such a feeling even when he faced the little girl just now. After a moment of silence, Jianmu suddenly said, "Kill the little girl first. Kill the little girl first." The white light in the sky suddenly trembled violently, and then a flying knife suddenly flew out. This time, the flying knife's target was Yi Ling, who was below, suddenly opened her eyes. However, her eyes were completely white. The white little fellow was shocked when she saw Yi Ling suddenly open her eyes, and then she blinked and lightly tapped Yi Ling. However, Yi Ling didn't react. The expanse of white in Yi Ling's eyes suddenly started to revolve like a white vortex. The white little fellow's claws trembled, and then she hesitated for a moment before continuing to transfer violet energy to Yi Ling. Moreover, the flying knife had arrived above them. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly appeared above them. As soon as Yi Xian raised his head, an expanse of blood-red light surged out from his eyes. However, the blood-red light exploded upon contact with the flying knife, and then the flying knife slashed towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian swiftly raised his sword with both hands to block it. Bang! The space in the surroundings trembled violently, and then it cracked apart. A strand of blood essence sprayed out from Yi Xian's mouth. At the same time, his arms had cracked apart like a spider's web, and fresh blood sprayed from them. However, the flying knife had vanished. Meanwhile, the white little fellow was growing more and more illusory, because she'd emanated too much violet energy. Right when she was about to vanish, the little fellow gazed at Yi Ling. Yi Ling's hair had suddenly turned silver. Moreover, there was a small crack between her brows, and this crack wasn't just madly absorbing the violet energy, it was even absorbing the spirit energy in the heavens and the earth. Jianmu's expression changed when he witnessed this scene, and his intuition told him that something bad was about to occur. Jianmu raised his head to look at the white light, and he practically roared furiously. "Kill that little girl first. Kill her." The white light trembled slightly in midair, and then it started revolving. In next to no time, an invisible pressure slowly seeped out from it, and it seemed like something was approaching. In the distance, the white little fellow gazed at Yi Xian, waved her little claw, and then vanished completely. After she vanished, a strand of violet light directly entered the center of Yi Ling's brows. Yi Ling's sleeves had suddenly transformed into ash, and then numerous tiny blood-red talismans had suddenly appeared on her tiny arms. These talismans were extremely strange, and they seemed to be converging something. Moreover, the light in the surroundings had suddenly dimmed down while chilly winds blew in waves. It seemed like something was wailing, and it was an extremely horrifying sight. Jianmu's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene, and he roared madly with fury. "Kill her! Kill her!" Because the uneasiness in his heart was growing stronger and stronger. Terror. Presently, deep terror filled the depths of his heart. His intuition told him that something terrible would occur if the little girl didn't die. In midair, a saber suddenly flew out from within the expanse of white light. At the instant this saber appeared, the sword whirled in an area of a few thousands of kilometers suddenly started to collapse inch by inch. The expressions of Jianmu and the other experts of the sword sect changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and Jianmu shouted furiously, "Do you intend to kill us as well?" There was no reply. The saber slashed down slowly from midair. Everywhere it passed, space was transformed into nothingness, and the sword world was utterly unable to endure this force and started to collapse inch by inch. Countless experts of the sword sect were horrified, and they hurriedly tried to protect themselves. Jianmu's expression changed drastically as well, because he hadn't expected that the saber would actually be so formidable. The entire sword world would be destroyed if this saber descended. After hesitating for a short while, Jianmu didn't stop it in the end, nor was he able to stop it. Even though he didn't want the sword world to be destroyed, he wanted Yi Xian and Yi Ling to die even more. In the distance, Yi Xian raised his head and looked at the expanse of blood-red light. Chapter 840. A trace of fluctuation had finally appeared in Yi Ling's eyes when he heard Yi Xian. On the other side, Jianmu instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Yi Xian's chest had been pierced through by the saber. He's finally dead. Regardless of whether it was Yi Ling or Yi Xian, both of them must die. He wouldn't be at ease until they died. Yi Xian's aura was growing weaker and weaker. However, his left hand was still holding tightly onto the blade of the saber, and he didn't allow it to move even an inch further. At this moment, the sword wood in the distance suddenly disappeared. In the next moment, a sword appeared behind Yi Xian. He couldn't wait any longer. Right at this moment, the talisman markings on Yi Ling's arms suddenly converged at her throat, and then, right at this moment, Yi Ling's eyes suddenly turned a strange dark red color. Right when Jianmu's sword was half an inch away from the back of Yi Xian's head, a hand had suddenly grabbed onto his sword. It was Yi Ling's hand. Jianmu gazed at Yi Ling with astonishment. He was just about to speak when Yi Ling's hand suddenly clamped down on his throat. Everyone in the surroundings was shocked. Even Jianmu was inconsolably shocked in his heart. He hadn't even been able to react to it. How could this be possible? Even that horned little girl wasn't able to render him powerless to fight back. Yi Ling gazed at Jianmu, and her voice was icy cold and completely emotionless. I grant you death. As soon as she finished speaking, Jianmu's eyes suddenly opened wide. In the next moment his aura vanished, and he perished on the spot. The experts of the sword sect were stunned when they witnessed this scene, and all of them retreated explosively. Yi Ling glanced at the experts of the sword sect. In the next moment, all of them froze on the spot, and then they fell down one by one. In an instant, a few dozen experts of the sword sect had perished. Yi Ling turned around to gaze at Yi Xian. She just gazed at Yi Xian. At this moment Yi Xian's aura was growing weaker and weaker. Yi Ling walked over to Yi Xian, and then she opened her palm. The pagoda within Yi Xian's body had appeared in her palm. Her beautiful brows knit together slightly as she gazed at the pagoda in her palm. A short while passed before she turned around and left with the pagoda in her hand. However, she hadn't even taken 2 steps before she stopped. And then she turned around and walked over to Yi Xian. She gazed at Yi Xian for a very long time before she placed her right hand lightly on Yi Xian's shoulder. The talismans on her arms suddenly started to tremble, and it didn't take long for the center of her forehead to split open before a ray of black light suddenly surged into the center of Yi Xian's forehead. As soon as the ray of black light entered his forehead, the bloodline within Yi Xian's body instantly calmed down. Moreover, a strand of black energy started to repair Yi Xian's body. He had never felt so unfamiliar before. He knew that the Yi Ling just now might not be the Yi Ling he knew. What exactly happened? Yi Xian could not understand it no matter how he thought about it. However, he was clear about one thing. Yi Ling had gone to the 5th dimension, and she must have succeeded. After a moment, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. He clenched his fists. After a long time, he suddenly opened his eyes. To the 5th dimension. No matter what happened to Yi Ling, he must go to the 5th dimension to find her. Yi Xian stood up. He waved his right hand, and the executing heaven sword flew into his hand. At the same time, he put away the prism pagoda and walked outside. At this moment, a group of people was waiting outside the sword realm. The experts of the dual realm sky. The leader was Grand Elder Chen. The moment he saw Yi Xian come out, Grand Elder Chen's right hand trembled slightly, because the sword realm was gone. The sword realm was gone. Grand Elder Chen calmed himself down, and then walked in front of Yi Xian. He smiled. Little friend, this sword sect. Yi Xian did not speak. He quickly disappeared into the distance. At this moment, Chen Shi suddenly appeared in front of Grand Elder Chen. Chen Shi said in a low voice, Grand Elder, everyone in the sword sect has fallen. Not a single one survived. Grand Elder Chen was stunned when he heard this. The experts of the dual realm sky were dumbfounded as well. The sword sect, the strongest sect in the fourth dimension, had been annihilated just like that. Yi Xian did it? Grand Elder Chen and the others became extremely solemn. After Yi Xian left the sword realm, he returned to the northern region. When they saw Yi Xian, Lanxiao and the others heaved a heavy sigh of relief. He had returned alive. However, their hearts were still heavy because they did not see Yi Ling. Yi Xian returned to his room. Yi Xian sat quietly in his room. The fifth dimension. He took out the world prism pagoda. He knew that if he wanted to go to the fifth dimension, he had to rely on it. Because with his current strength, it was impossible for him to break through the fifth dimension. At this moment, Lian Qian appeared in front of Yi Xian. She glanced at Yi Xian and said, My apologies. She was referring to the fact that he did not come out to help in the sword world. Yi Xian shook his head. How can I blame you? As he spoke, he looked at the world prism pagoda. How can I use this pagoda to enter the fifth dimension? Lian Qian was silent. Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian. Lian Qian said softly, You reached the fifth dimension. What happened after that? Yi Xian was silent. Lian Qian continued, Even if you go to the fifth dimension now, you won't be able to change anything. Besides, do you know what happened to your sister? Yi Xian shook his head. Lian Qian said softly, I know your sister is very strong. Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian. Lian Qian had a complicated expression. Her true identity is the Shura Empress of the fifth dimension. She is also the last empress of the human world. Yi Xian frowned. Shura Empress? The last empress of the human world? Lian Qian nodded. No one knows what her real name is. They only know that she came from the Azura Hell. When she came out, she directly swept away all the emperors of the fifth dimension. After she defeated the strongest emperor of the fifth dimension in 3 moves, no one in the fifth dimension dared to call themselves emperors in front of her. Later on, no one dared to call themselves emperors because they were not worthy in front of her. She is the most powerful woman in the fifth dimension, and also the most powerful woman in the history of the fifth dimension. As she said this, she slightly paused and then continued. In the fifth dimension, no one dares to provoke her. Even the master of the fifth dimension doesn't dare to rashly provoke her. However, what I don't understand is why she appeared in the fourth dimension. Moreover, she became your sister. Yi Xian suddenly asked. She is my sister, and also the Shura Empress. Lian Qian was silent. Yi Xian asked again, What is it? Lian Qian softly said, She is your sister, but she might not be. This depends on her. However, I feel that she should be. Moreover, she hasn't forgotten everything. Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian. Why? Lian Qian solemnly said. If she was only the Shura Empress, she definitely wouldn't have let you go. Moreover, she wouldn't have left this pagoda here. Therefore, I feel that she should still be your sister. Otherwise, you wouldn't have survived. Yi Xian was silent. Lian Qian continued. Even if she reincarnated, you must understand that she reincarnated into your sister in this life. This is something she can't erase. Even if she has the memories of her previous life, this is a fact that cannot be changed. But, as she said this, she paused and then continued. But if you still want to be her brother, you should know how difficult it is. Yi Xian suddenly said, Go to the fifth dimension. Lian Qian said, You don't need this pagoda. Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian. Lian Qian solemnly said, You must rely on your own strength to force your way through. Only then can you survive in the fifth dimension. If you use this pagoda to take a shortcut, you won't have the ability to survive there, let alone find your sister. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian said, Then I'll force my way through. Force his way through the fifth dimension. Chapter 841. Yi Xian knew what Lian Qian meant. With his current strength, if he borrowed the world prism pagoda to go to the fifth dimension, There would only be one result: waiting for death. With his current strength, it was impossible for him to fight against the experts of the fifth dimension. If he did not use the power of his bloodline, he might not even be able to defeat a life-breaking expert. With this kind of strength, how could he go to the fifth dimension? How could he find his sister Yi Ling? No way. Yi Xian stood up and slowly walked to the side of the house, softly saying, "I am still not strong enough. But what level do I have to reach to be considered strong?" Along the way, he became stronger and stronger, but also weaker and weaker. The stronger his strength, the more people he met, and the things he encountered would naturally change. What was considered strong? Invincible in the fourth dimension. However, there was still the fifth dimension. In the fifth dimension, would being invincible in the fourth dimension still be considered invincible? Endless martial path. Endless sword path. This was a road without end. At this time, Lin Qian suddenly said, "What you need to do now is to reach the peak of this world. Your sword path should at least reach the mortal realm, or touch the mortal realm. Only then will you not be powerless to fight back when you go to the fifth dimension. Because you have this pagoda, it means that your opponents in the fifth dimension are also extremely powerful existences." Saying this, she walked to Yi Xian's side and softly said, "You have to understand that going to the fifth dimension might be a new beginning for you, but it might also be the end. Because the experts of the fifth dimension will not give you a chance. They know your background and know that there are people behind you. They will not look down on you like the experts of the fourth dimension. If they attack you, they will definitely use their full strength, because the World Prism Pagoda is too important to them." World Prism Pagoda. As if thinking of something, Lin Qian softly sighed. Those people will really go crazy because Master's Universal Library is an irresistible temptation for them. Yi Xian suddenly asked, "This time, the people behind the sword sect should be experts of the fifth dimension. Miss Lin Qian, do you know who they are?" Lin Qian was silent. Just as Yi Xian was about to say something, Lin Qian suddenly said, "When you reach the fifth dimension in the future, you will naturally know." Yi Xian nodded. "I understand." At this moment, a woman walked over. Enlancio. Enlancio walked over to Yi Xian and said in a light voice, "Are you all right?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I'm fine." Enlancio nodded and said in a light voice, "Don't do that next time." Yi Xian said softly, "We must all live well." Enlancio nodded. "All of you must live well." Because that kind of pain was really too unbearable. At noon, he felt that the pain in his body had greatly lessened. At this moment, Lin Qian suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian, and her brows slightly furrowed. Yi Xian looked at Lin Qian. "What is it?" Lin Qian glanced at Yi Xian, and her expression became somewhat solemn. "Your body." Yi Xian slowly stood up, and he glanced at his body. In the next moment he was directly stunned. At this moment, his body hadn't changed at all. However, if one took a closer look, one would notice that his skin actually contained boundless sword energy and sword intent. His body now seemed to be formed by sword energy and sword intent. Invincible sword physique. At this moment, he truly understood what it meant to be invincible sword physique. His current physique was equivalent to the sword physique, but as for whether it was invincible or not, he wasn't particularly sure. At this moment, Lin Qian suddenly said, "This cultivation technique of yours is really strange. Now that your body, sword intent, and sword energy have merged into one, it can be said that your current physical body has become extremely strong to an extremely terrifying degree. Try using that sword of yours." Hearing this, Yi Xian suddenly took out the executing heaven sword and slashed at his body. Sizzle! A ray of fiery light flickered on his body. Moreover, his body was completely unharmed. However, a lot of sword intent and sword energy had disappeared, but he could immediately replenish them. Lin Qian said, "Your physical body is amazing." Yi Xian nodded slightly. Deep down, he was also extremely shocked. His current physical body could be said to be extremely strong. It should be known that even the executing heaven sword couldn't cut through him. Apart from that, his cultivation stage had also changed. He had directly advanced from the extreme creation stage to the Earth's celestial stage. As for his physical body, his current physical body could no longer be measured by cultivation stage. His current physical body could definitely resist the strength of a powerhouse at the level of Mu Qingfeng. Not only Mu Qingfeng, but even a powerhouse at the level of Jianmu would not be able to easily destroy his physical body. Apart from that, if he were to face a swordsman now, as long as it wasn't an extremely strong swordsman, he would be in an invincible position. Of course, he didn't dare to be complacent. After all, there were countless powerhouses in this world. If he really encountered a swordsman at the level of the sword master at the top of the pagoda and underestimated his enemy, then he would really be courting death. Even though his strength had improved greatly, Yi Xian knew that it was far from enough. Yi Xian gazed at Lian Qian, and the latter fell silent for a moment before she said, "You have to stop your cultivation for a while. You can only charge towards the life realm after it's stabilized. During this period, you have to strengthen 3 things. Firstly, your sword Dao. Secondly, your sword technique. Thirdly, your sword domain. That's your core. Especially your sword technique. You don't just have to cultivate your boundless sword well. You have to cultivate your single strike of life and death well as well." Single strike of life and death. Yi Xian fell silent. He naturally hadn't forgotten this sword technique, because it was the woman in a plain dress who'd taught him this sword technique. However, he'd rarely used this sword technique, since he'd utilized the boundless sword. Isn't this single strike of life and death strong? The woman in a plain dress's sword technique is definitely strong. Meanwhile, Lian Qian said, "I've been studying your single strike of life and death lately, and I noticed that this sword technique can be said to have no upper limit. It has no upper limit, but it's very difficult to bring forth its true might. Yet now both your strength and sword technique have improved greatly. So long as you're able to comprehend the essence of this sword technique, then you'll be able to bring forth its true might." Yi Xian nodded. "I understand." Lian Qian shook her head. "You still don't fully understand it. You have to remember that this sword technique doesn't have an upper limit, but it doesn't have a lower limit as well. If you're unable to truly understand its essence, then you'll be unable to bring forth its true might." Yi Xian fell silent. Single strike of life and death. He'd heard from the woman in a plain dress that the might of this sword technique depended on one's attitude. Once this sword technique was executed, one's opponent would live and die according to its will. This was the core of this sword technique. It sounded very simple, but how difficult was it to accomplish? Single strike of life and death. From his point of view, this sword technique was meant for the strong to use against the weak. Only the strong would have such a disdainful state of mind towards the weak. How could a person with lower strength be able to decide the life and death of another person with a single strike? However, he also understood that the woman in a plain dress must have had her reasons for teaching him this sword technique. So here's the problem. How was he supposed to use this sword skill? Yi Xian fell into deep thought. Lian Qian retreated to the side and didn't disturb Yi Xian. Lian Qian looked at the horizon with a trace of worry in her eyes. Yi Xian would definitely go to the 5th dimension. And once Yi Xian went to the 5th dimension, one must know that the current 5th dimension no longer had a prophet. It was no longer the 5th dimension that she was familiar with. Chapter 842. In the mountain range, Yi Xian sat on top of a mountain with a sword floating in front of him. One sword to decide life and death. At that moment, his mind kept replaying the scene of the plain-dressed woman killing people. How did the plain-dressed woman kill people? Contempt. In the eyes of the plain-dressed woman, it was disregard for life. In her eyes, everyone was like an ant. Confidence. At the end of the day, it was confidence. Of course, the reason why she was confident was because of her strength. Therefore, the core of this one sword to decide life and death was strength. However, other than strength, there was another core, and that was confidence. When facing an enemy, one must have confidence. Even if one could not win, one must have the confidence to kill with one sword. This was not deceiving oneself. If one did not have confidence, one would not be able to achieve anything. Confidence did not mean one had to be blindly confident. If one was blindly confident, one would be deceiving oneself and others. Yi Xian extended his hand and held the executing heaven sword in front of him. Confidence? What was his confidence based on? His backer? One had to admit that there was a time when his confidence was his backer. The plain-dressed woman, Yen, the prison pagoda, the executing heaven sword, to put it simply, his confidence was actually built on external objects and forces. This kind of confidence was superficial and unrealistic. Just like this time at the sword sect, the plain-dressed woman was not there, Yen was not there, and not only did he almost die, but Yi Ling almost died as well. Without external forces, could he still be confident? At that moment, Yi Xian understood a little. His confidence was wrong. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Along the way, too many people had helped him. As for himself, not only was he not ashamed of it, he was even a little smug. Just think about it. If he didn't have the woman in a simple dress, and those people that were helping him from behind, would he be able to survive until now? One must rely on oneself. Rely on oneself. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Lian Qian glanced at Yi Xian, but did not say anything. Ever since Yi Ling left, she realized that Yi Xian had changed. As for what had changed, she could not tell. However, this shouldn't be a bad thing, because she found Yi Xian had not really grown up until then. In the following days, Yi Xian spent every day crazily researching the life and death sword. This was the sword skill that the plainly dressed woman had taught him, and he was going to cultivate it to the extreme. And every time, Lian Qian would guide him from the side. Yi Xian discovered that although Lian Qian's strength wasn't particularly strong, she was very knowledgeable. It could be said that in this four-dimensional universe, there weren't many people who were more knowledgeable than her. Therefore, under Lian Qian's guidance, he could be said to have improved by leaps and bounds. Moreover, the might of this sword that determined life and death was also getting stronger and stronger. Following the destruction of the sword sect, the four-dimensional universe suddenly calmed down. The dual realm sky had already guessed that the world prison pagoda was in Yi Xian's hands, but no one made a move. Who would dare to move now? Yi Xian entered the sword world, and then the sword world disappeared. However, Yi Xian walked out alive. It could be said that Yi Xian was currently the most dangerous person in the four-dimensional universe. There was no one else. Therefore, even if the people of the dual realm sky knew that the world prison pagoda was in Yi Xian's hands, they didn't do anything. Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent and no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as the crown prince will be replaced by Yi Lang. The person who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi clan's elders. Why? At this moment, a somewhat timid voice suddenly rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall, and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is the crown prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The great elder looked coldly at Yi Ling. This is a matter of the clan. Why are you interrupting? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid, and did not dare to look directly at the great elder. However, she did not leave, and instead plucked up her courage to enter the ancestral hall. She once again bowed to the elders on both sides. Elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan Hill. He is fighting for the clan, and it is unknown whether he is dead or alive. Yet, the clan is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The great elder suddenly raged. Whether or not he is crippled, it is not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new crown prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The great elder coldly replied. Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi clan's guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he is fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince, Yi Lang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered. Young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of crown prince, and it is everyone's wish. What are you shouting for? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap! A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry, and only clutched her cheek tightly. Yi Ling looked at the guard and smiled. "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. "Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince." Yi Ling nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the crown prince, I will need 10 personal guards. From now on, you will be my personal guard." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and hurriedly bowed deeply. "This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the crown prince, and I am willing to die 1,000 deaths." Yi Ling nodded. "Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Do not hold back." "Understood." Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the killing intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this time, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something, and he suddenly stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was dressed in a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from the Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. Within the ancestral hall, all the elders were frowning. The great elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang, and was about to speak, when Yi Xian suddenly leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. However, Yi Ling did not stop, and he rushed towards Zhang Mu again. At this time Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you!" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped down on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the elders of the Yi clan. "Why?" Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look, and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a hint of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Yi Xian was to be replaced, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The girl called Yi Ling bowed to everyone in the hall, as she asked timidly, "Great elder, my brother Yi Xian is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The great elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. "This is a matter of the clan. What are you interrupting for? Leave." Yi Ling was obviously afraid, not daring to look at the great elder, but she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and walked into the hall. Once again, she bowed to the elders. Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan. He is fighting for the clan, and it is unknown whether he is dead or alive. Yet, the clan is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair. Impudent, the great elder suddenly raged. Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time the new prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The great elder replied coldly. Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he is fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered. Young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of prince, and it is the wish of everyone. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap! The crisp sound of the slap was heard, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. What's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed. Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince. Yi Lang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the prince, I will need 10 guards. From now on, you will be my guard. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and hurriedly bowed deeply. Subordinate will go through fire and water for the prince, and I will do anything for you. Yi Lang nodded. Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Do not hold back. Understood? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the killing intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this time, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something, and he suddenly stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. Within the ancestral hall, all the elders were frowning. The great elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang, and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and he charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared. Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, Your man? As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me! Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. Brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 843. Yi Xian looked up, and saw an old man slowly walking over from the horizon. The old man wore a loose black robe. His long hair was tied up, and he held a horsetail whisk in his hand. There was a black mark between his eyebrows. At this moment, Emperor Shi walked over to Yi Xian's side and said softly, Taoist Mountain Ghost. Very strong. Taoist Mountain Ghost looked at Yi Xian, and smiled slightly. Little friend, you have already destroyed his physical body. Can you give me some face and let him go? At this moment, the soul-suppressing sword in Yi Xian's hand suddenly flew out. Chi! In the distance, before the old bamboo staff man could react, the soul-suppressing sword pierced his eyebrows. The next moment, the soul-suppressing sword began to frantically absorb his soul. The old bamboo staff man was horrified. He wanted to resist, but how could he resist before the soul-suppressing sword? In less than a breath's time, the old bamboo staff man's soul was completely absorbed. Seeing this, Taoist mountain ghost's eyes narrowed slightly. However, the smile on his face did not diminish. Yi Xian waved his right hand, and the soul-suppressing sword flew into his hand. Then he turned and left. Taoist mountain ghost was silent, and did not make a move. He did not dare. In the past, no one had a true understanding of the strength of the person behind Yi Xian. But now, after the destruction of the Sword Sect, everyone understood. The Sword Sect, the #1 sect in the world, had been destroyed by Yi Xian. Who would dare to touch him? Even the big shots of the dual realm sky were now afraid of Yi Xian. After a moment, Taoist mountain ghost shook his head. This is the old bamboo staff man's own doing. After saying this, he turned and left. After a moment of silence, Emperor Shi also turned and left. Yi Xian did not leave the dual realm sky. Instead, he went to find Minister Chen. Minister Chen looked at Yi Xian in front of him. Little friend, that old bamboo staff man. Yi Xian said, Dead. Dead. Minister Chen's expression stiffened slightly. After a moment, he nodded slightly and did not say anything. Yi Xian suddenly asked, How do we go to the 5th dimension? Minister Chen was slightly startled. The next moment he said with some excitement, Little friend, are you going to the 5th dimension? If someone else said that they wanted to go to the 5th dimension, he would definitely scoff at it. However, Yi Xian could go to the 5th dimension. The reason for that was because he possessed the World Prism Pagoda. Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Grand Elder Chen smiled excitedly. He was about to speak when Yi Xian asked again, Take me there? Grand Elder Chen hurriedly nodded. All right. Just like that, Yi Xian followed Pavilion Elder Chen upward. About 4 hours later, the two of them arrived at a starry sky. At the end of the sky was a barrier that was covered with mysterious runes. There were some corpses floating below the barrier. Really? Yi Xian nodded. Really? However, during this period, I'll need some help from you. It won't be too long, 3 years at most. Pavilion Elder Chen took a deep breath, then bowed respectfully. Within 3 years, little friend, if you have any requests, just let me know. Yi Xian nodded. Good. Now I need some swords. The higher the grade, the better. The more months, the better. Pavilion Elder Chen said in a low voice. Little friend, don't worry. I'll get it done in a moment. Yi Xian nodded slightly. He looked up at the 5th dimension's barrier. This time, he would rely on his own strength to go to the 5th dimension, not taking any shortcuts. A moment later, Yi Xian turned into a sword light and disappeared into the horizon. In the same place, Pavilion Elder Chen looked up at the 5th dimension's barrier. 3 years. He knew that with his strength, even if he went to the 5th dimension, he would still be cannon fodder. However, he still wanted to go and take a look. Moreover, who knew if he could go to the 5th dimension and have a new beginning? In any case, he could only live in the 4th dimension. Moreover, he didn't have much time left. 3 years. To him, it was just a snap of his fingers. Yi Xian came to the top of a mountain. He stood beside a cliff and slowly closed his eyes. Yi Ling. At this moment, his mind was filled with images of Yi Ling leaving the 5th dimension. In the past, he didn't really want to go to the 5th dimension, but now he had to go. He didn't care about the Shura Empress. He only knew that it was his sister Yi Ling. At this moment, Lian Qian suddenly appeared beside Yi Xian. She said in a low voice, "Are you found, big sister?" Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian. Big sister? Lian Qian nodded. She's our big sister. However, she said that she was delayed by something and couldn't find you for the time being. As she said that, she looked at Yi Xian. She also wants to see you. Yi Xian asked, "See me?" Lian Qian nodded slightly. She might be interested in you. Yi Xian said, "All right." Lian Qian said, "Let's talk about your sword skills, sword domain, and your sword intent." Your current sword domain is based on your sword intent. Therefore, the core of your sword domain is your sword intent. Yi Xian asked, "Are there swordsmen in the fifth dimension?" Lian Qian nodded. Yes, there are many. However, the swordsman in the fifth dimension is different from the swordsman in the fourth dimension. Yi Xian was curious. What's the difference? Lian Qian said in a low voice. The swordsmen in the fifth dimension cultivate the sword. However, they focus more on sword skills. Their sword skills are different from those in the fourth dimension. For example, your immeasurable sword. Actually, you don't really understand this sword skill. Yi Xian said. I'd like to hear more about it. Lian Qian said. Do you know why this sword skill can ignore realms, Tao laws, and laws? Yi Xian shook his head. Lian Qian said. I can't explain it to you immediately. To put it simply, this immeasurable sword contains too much knowledge that your fourth dimension has never come into contact with. For example, after you execute the immeasurable sword, you will immediately enter the realm of emptiness. This realm of emptiness is actually a special kind of space. And this kind of space is an independent space that doesn't exist in the fourth dimension. To put it simply, even if the fourth dimension is annihilated, you can temporarily survive as long as you enter the realm of emptiness. Yi Xian was stunned, and then he said, Then as long as I enter the realm of emptiness, won't I be invincible? Lian Qian said indifferently, Can you stay in that space forever? Yi Xian shook his head. If he entered the realm of emptiness now, he could maintain it for an hour at most. Lian Qian said, Previously you used sword domain, bloodline power, and immeasurable sword. You didn't use the Tao laws of space, or the great Tao laws. Now try adding these two. Of course, don't use your bloodline power. She finally understood. Yi Xian's bloodline power was an existence that cheated. Of course, although this bloodline was powerful, it would also backfire. After all, if the Azura world hadn't forcefully suppressed him just now, he would have absolutely been unable to awaken. Yi Xian nodded when he heard Lian Qian, and then he slowly closed his eyes. It didn't take long for the spatial Tao laws and great Tao laws to appear between his brows. Bang! In an instant, the boundless energy of the earth veins in the surroundings converged towards him. Moreover, the space around him had started to gradually tremble as well. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. A sword had suddenly appeared in the distant horizon, and there was a blood-red prisoner character on top of the sword. At the same time, a strand of mysterious energy had enveloped the surroundings. Sword domain, immeasurable sword, mantra of the 6 syllables, great Tao laws, spatial Tao laws. It could be said that the might of this sword strike of his wasn't inferior to the might of his bloodline power. Moreover, if he were to utilize his bloodline power as well, then its might would be even more terrifying. It was very strong. However, Yi Xian was very well aware that while this sword strike was very strong, it wasn't his true strength. This was a sword strike that had been constructed from all sorts of external objects. Yi Xian turned to look at Lian Qian, and was about to speak. Suddenly, the sky split open, and a bolt of lightning descended. This bolt of lightning arrived directly above Yi Xian and Lian Qian. Yi Xian and Lian Qian looked up, and saw a middle-aged man standing within the bolt of lightning. The middle-aged man looked down at Yi Xian. I'm here to tell you that we've lost our patience. You and that woman behind you must die. P.S. Let's see if everyone can snatch another red packet. Give more this time. Chapter 844. Lost patience. Yi Xian was silent. He knew that the person in front of him came from the 5th dimension, and was not the real body. It should be a clone or an image. Lost patience. The opponent not only wanted to attack him, but also the plain-dressed woman. Yi Xian looked at the man. You guys can do it. After saying that, he turned and left. The man looked at Yi Xian coldly. 4-dimensional ant. As soon as he said that, his body gradually became illusory. Contempt. The look in the man's eyes was like that of a god looking down at ants on the ground. Arrogant. In fact, compared to the 5th dimension, the 4th dimension was really weak. In the eyes of the 5th dimension's experts, The fourth dimension was a group of barbarians without intelligence. However, they also admitted that there were powerful people in the fourth dimension. For example, the plain-dressed woman. They had already suffered a loss against the plain-dressed woman. Why did they suffer a loss? Because they were careless and did not understand. Now, they had a rough estimate of the plain-dressed woman's strength. They were now confident. The man looked to his right, which was the direction of the sword world. Unfortunately, they had lost the sword sect as a chess piece. Without the sword sect as a spy, it would affect them quite a bit. Of course, the Shura Empress's appearance was something they did not expect. They naturally did not dare to find the Shura Empress. But Yi Xian and the others had no scruples. The man threw a cold glance in the direction where Yi Xian had left. Soon he disappeared completely. In the distance, Yi Xian slowly walked away. Beside him, Lian Qian softly said, "They should be making a big move. Not only against you, but also against the plain-dressed woman." Yi Xian asked, "Will she be in danger?" Lian Qian solemnly said, "You should be asking if they will be in danger." Yi Xian stopped and looked at Lian Qian. Lian Qian softly said, "Even if Master was still alive, I'm afraid he would not be able to kill her. That woman was so powerful that she could not be reasoned with." Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. Then why are they still looking for her? Lian Qian bitterly smiled. Because they do not know her true strength. Or in other words, they miscalculated her strength. When she spoke up to hear, she paused for a moment and said, "Actually, even I don't know her true strength." Yi Xian nodded. "In other words, she will not be in danger. The one who will be in danger is me." Lian Qian nodded. "Yes." Lian Qian nodded. "Yes." Lian Qian was about to speak when Minister Chen walked over. He stopped in front of Yi Xian and smiled. "My young friend, the sword you wanted." Saying this, he handed a storage ring to Yi Xian. Yi Xian glanced at the storage ring. There were 30 swords in total. Of Yi Xian. Yi Xian was rather shocked. Although these swords were not as good as the Retribution Heaven Sword Realm Soul-Suppressing Sword, they could be said to be the best swords in this world. They would be of great help to him. "Thank you." Elder Chen smiled. "No problem. If you need anything, just let me know." Grand Elder Chen smiled and said, "It's no big deal. If you need anything, just let me know." Elder Chen smiled. "Don't mention it. If you need anything, just let me know." Pavilion Elder Chen said, "Young friend, don't stand on ceremony. If it's within my capabilities, this old man will definitely not decline." Saying this, he glanced at Lian Qian. "I will not disturb you too." Saying this, he retreated. Lian Qian asked softly, "You want to break through to the life realm?" Yi Xian nodded. "My cultivation level is not high enough." Lian Qian shook her head. Yi Xian was puzzled. "Why?" Lian Qian said, "You are too eager to break through. Haste makes waste, and it will ruin your progress." Yi Xian asked solemnly, "Then what should I do?" Lian Qian thought for a moment and said, "Change the method." Yi Xian asked, "What method?" Lian Qian smiled. "Fight." Yi Xian frowned. "Fight." Lian Qian nodded. "Fight is the easiest way to stimulate one's potential. You need to fight to the death." Yi Xian asked, "Who do you want to fight?" Lian Qian thought for a moment and said, "The experts of the five-dimensional universe." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, "Will I be killed?" Lian Qian nodded. "Maybe." Yi Xian was speechless. Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian. "Are you afraid?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I'm not afraid, but," Lian Qian suddenly said, "No buts. Let's go." Saying this, she walked into the distance. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, but then he also followed. He knew that Lian Qian would not let him die for nothing. Not long after, Lian Qian brought Yi Xian to a starry sky. Above them was the five-dimensional barrier. Besides the barrier, there were also some floating corpses. In fact, Yi Xian wanted to take these corpses and refine them into demonic corpses. However, he was a little worried. It was not because he was benevolent, but because he was afraid that these people were not completely dead. If these people were not completely dead, it would be a little embarrassing if he went to attack their corpses. At this time, Lian Qian suddenly said, "Do you see the five-dimensional barrier?" Yi Xian looked at the five-dimensional barrier and nodded. What is it? Lian Qian said softly. Go. Yi Xian hesitated. Really? Lian Qian nodded. Really? Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then turned into a sword light that soared into the sky. He did not hold back and directly used the immeasurable sword. Just as he was in the sky, a black lightning suddenly fell from the barrier. It was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, it struck the sword light. Rumble. Following the sound of an explosion, a figure fell from the sky. Soon this figure crashed beside Lian Qian. It was Yi Xian. At this time, Yi Xian's whole body was pitch black, and he could not stop trembling. On his body there were dense cracks. That strike just now had directly shattered his body. Although it was not completely destroyed, it was almost there. At the side, Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian with an expressionless face. The corner of Yi Xian's mouth twitched. Miss Lian Qian, Lian Qian asked. How does it feel? Yi Xian smiled bitterly. It feels like dying is better than living. That attack just now had almost destroyed his physical body. His invincible sword physique could not even withstand a single blow from that lightning. Lian Qian suddenly said, Defeat it. Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian. Defeat that lightning? Lian Qian nodded. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, That's not possible. Just now he did not hold back, but he was killed in a second. What was the point of fighting? Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian. You have to understand that the enemies you will face in the future are many times stronger than this lightning. When you go to the fifth dimension, you are destined to challenge those of a higher level. And now, you must train to have the ability to challenge those of a higher level. Yi Xian was silent. Lian Qian said again. Moreover, it is not that you cannot defeat that lightning, but your method is wrong. Yi Xian frowned. Method? Lian Qian nodded. You should not take it head-on. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Please enlighten me. Lian Qian said. You must learn to avoid its sharpness, find its flaws and kill it in one strike. Saying this, she looked at Yi Xian. In short, I don't care what method you use, you must defeat it. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then nodded. I will try. Lian Qian shook her head. Not try, but try your best. Do your best. Understand? Yi Xian nodded. Do your best. Lian Qian said. Heal your injuries, then continue. Yi Xian took a deep breath. He took out some spring of life, and began to absorb it. He looked at the black lightning above his head, still floating in the air. He had to admit that this black lightning was really terrifying. In his opinion, he would need to use the power of his bloodline, sword domain, and the 6 paths of truth to have a chance of fighting against this black lightning. But if he could defeat it like that, what meaning would it have? Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Lian Qian must have a deeper meaning for him to defeat the black lightning. It was not just a simple victory. Not far away, Lian Qian raised her head and looked at the 5th-dimensional barrier above her. Her eyes suddenly became somewhat vacant. Master, where are you? Speak cause and effect. Everything in this world has a cause and an effect. You created us. This is the cause, but where is our effect? Where should we go to find you? Chapter 845. Prophet of the 5th Dimension. Lian Qian was very clear that whether it was the 5th dimension or the 4th dimension, no one could kill a prophet. As long as he did not want to die, absolutely no one could kill him. Since he would not die, where did he go? After a while, Lian Qian shook her head, no longer thinking about this question. The most important thing now was to return to the 5th dimension. Although it was dangerous to return, it meant that there was a greater chance of finding her master. At this time, Lian Qian withdrew her thoughts and looked not far away. In the distance, Yi Xian stood up. Under the restoration of the spring of life, his injuries were recovering extremely quickly. Yi Xian raised his head and looked at the black lightning. Avoid its sharpness, find its flaw, and kill it in one strike. After pondering for a long time, Yi Xian suddenly slashed upwards, and a sword qi pierced through the air. However, before this sword qi could approach the black lightning, it disappeared without a trace. At this time, the black lightning suddenly fell from the sky at an extremely fast speed, so fast that Yi Xian's scalp went numb. Without any hesitation, he turned around and ran. His speed was also very fast, and in the blink of an eye, he disappeared into the horizon. Lian Qian. Yi Xian's aura disappeared, and the black lightning paused in the air for a moment before returning to its original position. Seeing that the black lightning did not chase after him, Yi Xian stopped. At this time, Lian Qian appeared beside him, and Yi Xian smiled awkwardly. Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian. You continue. Yi Xian nodded. He looked at the black lightning, and his brows deeply wrinkled. The power of this black lightning far exceeded his, and it was impossible to resist it head-on. However, if he did not resist it head-on, how could he win? At this time, Lian Qian suddenly took out a piece of wood that was as long as an arm. She looked at Yi Xian. This piece of wood, where do you think is the easiest to break? Yi Xian said. Naturally, the middle. Saying this, he was stunned. The middle. At this moment, he suddenly understood. Flaw. When facing an enemy, if he could find the opponent's flaw, wouldn't it be twice the result with half the effort? The answer was naturally. Yi Xian looked up at the black lightning. What was the flaw of this black lightning? Lian Qian asked. Do you know what the realm of ordinary swordsman is? Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian. Lian Qian said softly. The so-called ordinary sword is actually the essence, seeing through the essence. Just like this piece of wood in my hand. You said that it would break easily if you use force from the middle. That's true. But if we look further and more thoroughly, you'll realize that if you use fire, it would actually be easier to destroy it. Of course, the difference in strength is too great. Fighting the weak with the strong, you can use any kind of strength. But in order to defeat the strong, you have to find a way to use your strengths to attack the opponent's weaknesses. As she spoke, she looked at the wooden stick in her hand. Everything in this world has its counter. For example, if an ordinary person wanted to break this piece of wood in my hand, it would not be easy, so they would choose to use knives, saws, axes, or fire. Yi Xian was silent. Lian Qian continued. You're fighting someone stronger than you. The gap in strength is huge. If you still insist on fighting head-on, that would be foolish. Do you understand? Yi Xian nodded. I understand. Lian Qian continued. The so-called ordinary sword refers to the essence of all things. It's not easy to see through the essence of all things, but you have to walk in this direction. Yi Xian suddenly asked, is the sword of the plain-dressed woman an ordinary sword? More than that. Lian Qian said in a deep voice. She's definitely far more than the mortal realm. As to what level she's reached, I don't know, and I can't evaluate because I'm not qualified. Yi Xian nodded slightly. I understand. After saying that, he looked up at the black divine thunder in the sky. How could he defeat this black divine thunder? Yi Xian fell into deep thought. Flaws. He knew that he had to find flaws, but flaws were not that easy to find. Lian Qian glanced at Yi Xian, but did not say anything. Yi Xian had to rely on himself. At this moment, Yi Xian's eyes suddenly lit up. Got it. Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian suddenly disappeared, and when he reappeared, he was already in the sky. At this moment, the lightning suddenly fell. However, at this moment Yi Xian disappeared. He entered the emptiness realm. The lightning suddenly stopped in the air, because it had lost its target. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared behind the lightning, and at the same time, he slashed at the lightning with his sword. Boom! The lightning shook violently, and Yi Xian was directly sent flying. However, as soon as he flew out, he disappeared. He entered the emptiness realm again. The lightning was stunned. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared above its head, and stabbed down with his sword again. Boom! The lightning shook violently, and countless bolts of lightning shook the surroundings. Yi Xian was sent flying again, but just like before, he entered the emptiness realm again. The lightning was silent for a moment. Suddenly, it shook violently, and an expanse of lightning erupted. In an instant, the entire sky was turned into nothingness. Yi Xian was right beside that bolt of lightning. At this moment, he was rather shocked because he noticed that the energy of that bolt of lightning didn't cause any substantial harm to him. Of course, he was still affected by the shattering of this space. However, with his physical body, it was practically not affected at all. In other words, so long as he entered the emptiness realm, he would be invincible during this period of time. At this moment, he truly realized how terrifying the boundless sword was. This sword technique was meant for assassins. Of course, he could only execute the boundless sword 3 times in a short period of time. In other words, he could only enter the emptiness realm 3 times in a short period of time. Now he didn't choose to attack again. Instead, he retreated to the side and started to recuperate. Not far away, the lightning was still wreaking havoc. It was obvious that it was very irritable. Just like that, the lightning continued for about an hour before it finally stopped. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of it again. The lightning instantly shook violently, and an expanse of lightning shook. However, Yi Xian disappeared again. The lightning shook in the starry sky, and the entire starry sky directly trembled. Below, Lian Qian shook her head and smiled. She knew what method Yi Xian was using. Grind. I can't beat you, but I will grind you to death. Needless to say, this was also a method. In this way, Yi Xian grinded it bit by bit. During this period, he was still very careful because the power of the lightning was too strong. It was not something that he could withstand. Therefore, he could only rely on grinding, not brute force. In the past, when he fought with others, he relied on the executing heaven sword in his hand and his strong physical body to fight head-on. But now he was fighting the strong as the weak, so he could not use brute force. And now, the lightning was being ground down by him until it became more and more irritable. While Yi Xian was cultivating, in an unknown area, a woman was slowly walking in the void. The woman had a head of silver-white hair, a petite figure, and a calm but indifferent gaze. After an unknown amount of time, she suddenly stopped. At this moment, 3 old men suddenly appeared in front of the woman. The 3 old men hurriedly knelt down, and the leading old man said in a trembling voice, "Master, you've returned." The woman slowly closed her eyes. "Tell me about the current 5th dimension." The old man said in a deep voice, "Since the prophet disappeared, the order of the 5th dimension has suddenly become chaotic. Although that person from the heaven domain is still there, Master also knows that without the prophet's support, she does not have the ability to rule the 5th dimension." Saying this, he paused and then said, "As far as we know these years, she has been frantically searching for the prophet, but there is not the slightest clue." After a moment of silence, the woman said, "What is her current strength?" The old man shook his head. "No one knows because she has not appeared for a very long time." The woman nodded. "Continue," the old man said. "Besides her, the master of the southern sky dome realm, Jian Shui, is also searching for the prophet. She is even crazier. In order to find the prophet, she has already entered the unknown void dimension and has not returned. Void dimension. Hearing this, the woman's eyes narrowed. That was an unknown dimension. In history, only one person had entered and returned. That was the prophet. After he came out, he smiled and said, "The world is really mysterious," the woman said. "What about the Myriad Dimensional Academy?" The old man said, "At first, after the prophet disappeared, they searched for him. But later, the new master of the Myriad Dimensional Academy, Chun Tian, stopped searching. Instead, he started searching for the World Prism Pagoda that the prophet once left. However, the female teacher of the Myriad Dimensional Academy is still searching." Female teacher. Hearing this, the woman looked at the old man. "What realm is she now?" The old man shook his head. "I don't know. The last time she appeared was 1,000 years ago. At that time, she appeared in the immortal residence forest where the prophet once lived. At that time, she was riding a little donkey and holding a scroll." After a moment of silence, the woman said softly, "She still can't let it go." The old man hesitated before asking, "This subordinate doesn't understand why she is so persistent in searching for the prophet." The woman said, "When she was 6 years old, her parents discovered that she was born with a missing soul and a physical body. Moreover, she was mentally deficient and could not cultivate for the rest of her life. Then, she was abandoned in a mass grave and left to fend for herself. It was the prophet who passed by and took her away. Although her soul was missing, she was the most accomplished person under the prophet. If she liked to fight, the current master of the Myriad Dimensional Academy, would not be that Chen Tian. The old man nodded slightly. This female teacher's prestige in the Myriad Dimensional Academy was very high. No, it should be said that her prestige in the entire fifth dimension was very high. This was because she did not fight and was kind to others. At this time, the old man suddenly said, "Master, we already know that the World Prism Pagoda is in the hands of a youth called Yi Xian in the fourth dimension." Yi Xian. The woman's eyes suddenly flickered. "I know," the old man said in a deep voice. "Chen Tian is preparing to make a move. It is said that his target is not only that youth Yi Xian, but also a female swordsman. This time, they are prepared to do it for real." At this point he paused before saying, "Master, this pagoda can open the all-creation bookhouse. Therefore this subordinate made the decision to send people there. As long as Chen Tian makes a move against that female swordsman, our people will make a move against Yi Xian. At that time," the woman suddenly said, "Let them come back." After saying that, she frowned. That was because she had blurted out this sentence without even thinking about it. It was like an instinct. The old man was somewhat startled. "Master." After a moment of silence, the woman said, "Let them come back." The old man looked at the woman and did not dare to refute. He nodded slightly and quietly retreated. After the old man left, the woman opened her palm, and a wooden figure appeared in her hand. Looking at the wooden figure, scenes suddenly appeared in her mind. "Wow, brother, do you want to eat fish tonight? It smells so good, brother. Why aren't you eating?" "Brother has eaten. Look, my belly is so big." "Brother, did you only order a bowl of noodles?" "Brother, I ate." "Look, my belly is so big." "Brother, if this illness of mine cannot be cured, after I die, put my ashes in a small bamboo tube and keep it by your side. I want to be by your side forever, okay? If it cannot be cured, brother will accompany you in death. Why? Brother does not want you to be alone in the other world." Chapter 846. After a long time, the woman put away the piece of wood in her hand and said softly, "You are a good brother." After saying that, she disappeared on the spot. In the starry sky, there was a tremor of lightning. The surrounding starry sky began to tremble violently under the influence of this tremor of lightning. After a moment of silence, a snow-white sword light suddenly appeared above the head of the lightning. In the next moment, the sword light slashed down in a straight line. Boom! The black lightning trembled violently, and then a wave of lightning surged out. The sky shook violently. However, Yi Xian disappeared again. Grind! Yi Xian was now relying on grinding. In fact, although he could not defeat this black lightning, he had gained a lot. Play to his strengths and avoid its weaknesses, avoid its sharp edges, find its flaws, and kill it in one strike. Now he had learned how to play to his strengths and avoid its weaknesses. As for looking for flaws, he had just begun. Looking for flaws was not an easy task, especially this divine lightning, which seemed to be flawless. However, he knew that there must be a flaw. Beside him, Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian, who was constantly grinding the divine lightning in the distance. She was a little surprised, because Yi Xian's comprehension was really good. Although he was not a super monster who could understand with a single point, at least he was working hard. Hard work. Her master had once said that innate talent was bestowed by the heavens, but hard work was more important. If one did not work hard, they would be wasting their talent. And Yi Xian was working hard. This continued for about 10 days. Yi Xian could now fight with this black lightning for about an hour. In this hour, he perfectly resolved many of the black lightning's attacks. However, he still found it difficult to counterattack. This was because once he got close to this black lightning, he would have to face it head-on. With his current strength, he was completely unable to do so. After a while, Yi Xian stopped and returned to Lian Qian's side. He looked at the divine lightning in the sky. "Miss Lian Qian, if I defeat this black lightning, can I directly enter the fifth dimension?" Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian. "What are you thinking about?" Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian. "What's wrong?" Lian Qian said, "This divine lightning is only the first stage. You've defeated it, But there's still a second stage, a third stage, a fourth stage, a fifth stage. Yi Xian was speechless. Lian Qian continued. You still have a long way to go, understand? Yi Xian nodded. Understood. Lian Qian glanced at the godly lightning. Maybe you can think of another way. With that, she turned around and left. On the spot, Yi Xian was stunned. Think of another way? Exchange for what? Yi Xian looked at the divine lightning and pondered for a long time. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and the corners of his lips curled up. He suddenly thought of something. Why did he only use his sword? Thinking of this, Yi Xian shook his head, feeling a little silly. Without thinking too much, he suddenly turned into a beam of sword light and soared into the sky. As soon as Yi Xian made his move, the black lightning in the sky suddenly trembled. Immediately afterward, countless lightning bolts shot out from the sky. At this moment, the space Dao Law suddenly appeared between Yi Xian's brows. In the next moment, a blood-red prisoner word suddenly appeared on the lightning bolt. As this word appeared, the lightning bolt was directly covered by a red light. At the same time, a mysterious force enveloped the black lightning. This time, the black lightning seemed to sense danger. It trembled violently and terrifying lightning bolts shot out continuously. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly disappeared. He disappeared again. Secretly, Yi Xian was quite excited at this moment. He had not wanted to use the 6 paths of truth, infinite sword, and sword domain to kill his opponent. Instead, he wanted to see if his strongest attack could pose a threat to his opponent. However, he had not expected that when his sword domain enveloped his opponent, he would make a new discovery, a flaw. Under the envelopment of his sword domain, he'd discovered the flaw of the lightning bolt. As soon as the lightning bolt stopped, Yi Xian suddenly appeared above it. In the next moment, his sword domain enveloped the lightning bolt. In the blink of an eye, numerous beams of sword light slashed at the lightning bolt. Bang! Countless bolts of lightning exploded, and Yi Xian was instantly blasted flying. When he stopped, he immediately looked up at the lightning bolt. At this moment, the lightning bolt had become slightly illusory, but it quickly condensed. Yi Xian's face instantly sank when he saw this. Right at this moment, the black lightning in the distance suddenly vanished. Hiss! Yi Xian's pupils constricted abruptly, and he swiftly raised his sword horizontally to block it. Bang! An expanse of lightning erupted before him, and then he was blasted flying. During the process of his flying, lightning bolts exploded incessantly around him. When Yi Xian had stopped, countless lightning bolts were shooting at him like a storm in front of him. Yi Xian was shocked, and he didn't hesitate to enter the emptiness state. Countless bolts of lightning flashed through the starry sky, and it was extremely shocking. This time, it continued for around 2 hours before it stopped. Below, Yi Xian looked at the lightning that covered the starry sky above him, and he felt a lingering fear. He'd sensed that the black lightning had really been infuriated just now. Why had it been infuriated? That was because his sword had injured it. Meanwhile, Lian Qian appeared by Yi Xian's side. She looked at the black lightning and said softly, "That sword strike of yours can be stronger." Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian, and she said, "Burst out with speed. You can utilize the spatial Dao laws to enhance your sword strike, allowing your sword strike's speed and strength to reach its limits. Coupled with the characteristics of your sword domain, you can find its weakness and give it a lethal strike. Of course, it's not very possible for you to kill it with your current strength. However, it's already very good." Yi Xian nodded. When he'd first faced the black lightning, he'd almost been instantly killed by it. But after a month of battle, even though he still couldn't defeat it, he was much better than before, because he could injure the black lightning now. Moreover, the black lightning couldn't injure him as easily as it had in the beginning. He'd improved too much. Meanwhile, Lian Qian suddenly said, "Let it hit you." Yi Xian was stunned. Lian Qian looked at the black lightning and said softly, "This isn't ordinary lightning. If you let it temper your body, not only will your body be greatly strengthened, but you might even gain some special subordinates. For example, you might be immune to lightning in the future." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Miss Lian Qian, this isn't a joke." Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian and said, "You were blasted by it once, But didn't you survive? Yi Xian was speechless. Lian Qian said, "This is a superb opportunity to improve your physical body, because your current physical body has already reached an extremely formidable level. If you want to improve it further, then unless you have a great fortuitous encounter, it will be very difficult to do so." Lightning strike. Yi Xian was a little hesitant, because he still remembered the first time he'd been struck by lightning. It was really unbearable. It could be said that if he hadn't already attained the sword body, he would have been dead. He still had a lingering fear towards the divine lightning. At this moment Lian Qian said, "The divine lightning can't kill you in one strike. So if you can get used to the bombardment of the divine lightning, your body will definitely improve to another level. This is a great opportunity for you." Yi Xian thought about it and nodded. All right. He only had one thought in his mind, and that was to improve his strength. An hour later, Yi Xian raised his head to look at the black divine lightning. He had to admit that he was still a little afraid of it. The power of the divine lightning was too strong. Without much hesitation, Yi Xian transformed into a beam of sword light and shot into the sky. At this moment, the black divine lightning in the sky shook violently, and then it fell straight down. When he sensed the power contained in the divine lightning, Yi Xian's expression changed. To be honest, he wanted to run. However, when he thought of the benefits that the divine lightning would bring him, he decisively abandoned the thought of running. Soon, the divine lightning blasted his body. Boom! Yi Xian instantly fell from the sky, and as he fell, bolts of lightning kept exploding on his body. Ah! In the starry sky, Yi Xian's scream suddenly rang out. Soon Yi Xian stopped. At this moment, he had already put a very, very long distance between him and the divine lightning. After the divine lightning blasted him away, it did not choose to pursue him, but retreated to its original position. Yi Xian lay quietly in the starry sky, and his whole body was constantly flashing with lightning. At this moment, he had lost consciousness. His whole body was numb. At this moment, Lian Qian appeared beside Yi Xian. She glanced at Yi Xian, and had to admit that Yi Xian's body was a little terrible to look at. Without thinking too much, she waved her right hand, and a white bottle appeared beside Yi Xian's mouth. The spring of life. After the spring of life entered Yi Xian's body, Yi Xian's body immediately recovered at an extremely fast speed. Just like that, about an hour later, Yi Xian sat up. At this moment, his body was still sore and numb, as if all the bones in his body had fallen apart. That kind of feeling was a little sour. Lian Qian glanced at Yi Xian's body and said softly, "It really is useful." Hearing this, Yi Xian was stunned, and then said, "Miss Lian Qian, don't tell me that before this you weren't sure whether it would be useful or not?" Lian Qian nodded. "I guessed that it would be useful, but reality has proven that it is." Yi Xian. Lian Qian said, "Come, continue. What you need to do now is to continuously use the divine lightning to temper your body, over and over again. In any case, you need to completely adapt to the power of the divine lightning." Yi Xian nodded, and he looked up at the black lightning in the sky. Now he was no longer that afraid of the divine lightning. In any case, he couldn't kill him. What was there to be afraid of? After resting for a while, Yi Xian stretched his body, and then he looked up at the divine lightning in the sky and grinned. "Continue." As soon as he said this, he turned into a ray of sword light and shot into the sky. At this moment, the divine lightning in the sky suddenly descended. An instant later, boom, the entire starry sky suddenly trembled. Chapter 847. After a few breaths, Yi Xian lay down again. Just like before, his whole body was covered in injuries. About an hour later, Yi Xian rushed over again. Just like that, Yi Xian used his body to withstand the heavenly lightning again and again, letting the heavenly lightning temper his body. About 10 days later, his body became more and more capable of withstanding. In the beginning, when he was struck by the heavenly thunder, he was almost killed. Although he didn't die, it took him quite a while to stand up. But now, after being struck by the heavenly thunder, he recovered in 15 minutes at most. This proved that his body was becoming more capable of withstanding. However, this was far from enough. Continue. While Yi Xian was bitterly cultivating, Yi Xian and the other four-dimensional experts also came to this part of the starry sky. When they saw Yi Xian using his body to resist the heavenly lightning, they could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. They had been here for so many years, so they naturally knew how terrifying the heavenly lightning was. But they did not expect that Yi Xian would actually use his body to resist the heavenly lightning. How strong was his body? Everyone became more and more afraid of Yi Xian. Just like that, about 2 months later, on this day, Yi Xian suddenly walked in front of the black lightning. The black lightning directly fell, and a lightning light instantly submerged Yi Xian. The lightning light dissipated, and Yi Xian walked out. At this moment, he could completely use his body to resist the black lightning. However, he still could not kill it. The current situation between him and the black lightning was, "You can't kill me, and I can't kill you." After its attack failed, the black lightning returned to the sky. Yi Xian raised his head and looked at the black lightning. At this moment, the black lightning suddenly trembled violently. Then, it suddenly turned into a bolt of lightning and fell straight down. This time, Yi Xian still did not dodge. Facing this black lightning, he no longer had any fear. At this moment, the aura contained in the black lightning suddenly soared. Yi Xian was startled. Before he could react, the black lightning had already submerged him. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the entire starry sky was covered by black lightning. The entire starry sky flickered with lightning, and it was incomparably terrifying. About a quarter of an hour later, Yi Xian slowly walked out of the lightning. At this moment, his body was surrounded by lightning. The black lightning that had struck him had already retreated to the horizon. After a moment of silence, it suddenly disappeared. Seeing this scene, some of the fourth-dimensional experts in the distant starry sky looked at Yi Xian one after another. They knew that Yi Xian had passed the first test. From the fourth dimension to the fifth dimension, there were a total of 5 stages. As for this Yi Xian, he could be considered to have passed the first round. However, the subsequent rounds would only get stronger and stronger. At this moment, Lian Qian appeared in front of Yi Xian. She sized up Yi Xian with a look of surprise in her eyes. "Your physical body." When Yi Xian looked at his physical body, he was dumbfounded. Originally, his skin contained countless sword intents and sword chi, but now there was not only sword chi and sword intent, but also thunder and lightning. They had already fused with his sword intent and sword chi. Now he not only had a sword body, but also a lightning body. Of course, the toughness of his physical body was a level higher than before. Harvest. Yi Xian took a deep breath. The torture during this period of time had not been in vain. Lian Qian said, "Absorb the sword." Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian. She said, "The foundation of your physical body is extremely good. Even if you make another breakthrough, it won't have any negative effects on you." Yi Xian nodded. "Okay." After saying this, he took out a sword and began to absorb it. As soon as the sword entered his body, a wave of pure energy erupted from his body. However, it disappeared without a trace in an instant. All of it had been absorbed by his body. Yi Xian was stunned. Then he took out another sword and absorbed it. As soon as this sword entered his body, it was completely absorbed. Yi Xian did not stop and took out another sword. Just like that, after about an hour, he had absorbed all 30 swords. When he absorbed the last sword, a powerful aura suddenly swept out from his body. Wherever this aura passed, ripples appeared in the space like waves. He had not broken through yet. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground and slowly closed his eyes. In his body, waves of powerful aura constantly vibrated. Beside him, Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian and did not disturb him. It was not easy to reach the fate state. The so-called fate state was to know one's destiny. He had to rely on himself. Otherwise, he would be stuck at this step for the rest of his life. Fate. The so-called fate referred to fate. At the beginning of chaos, the fate of all living beings seemed to have been predetermined. It was like birth, old age, sickness, and death. Especially death. Since ancient times, who could avoid death? Where there was life, there would be death. This was the law and the fate of all living beings. And because some people became stronger and stronger, they could feel a trace of their own fate. What was his future fate? Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. He was a little confused. Fate. What was the future? From the beginning until now, he knew that he was different from others. Many powerful people knew him. More accurately, they knew him in his previous life. Previous life? What was his previous life? It was still the same question. His previous life was his previous life, and this life was this life. Fate. Yi Xian took a deep breath. My fate is in my own hands. Boom. A powerful aura erupted from his body. This aura was like a wave that shook the surroundings. In the blink of an eye, the entire starry sky trembled violently. Fate state. At this moment, Grand Elder Chen suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. He smiled. Congratulations. Yi Xian opened his eyes and slowly stood up. He clenched his fists and a powerful force gathered in his body. Fate state. At this moment, he understood the true meaning of the fate state. The fate state was not about feeling fate, but understanding the meaning of fate. Nothing was destined at birth. For example, the lifespan of humans was only a few decades in the beginning, but through cultivation, it could be 100 years, a few hundred years, or even a few thousand years. Fate was in one's own hands. Unless one accepted it, it could not decide one's life. Fate state. Yi Xian relaxed his hands, and the aura emitted from his body immediately calmed down. At this moment, Lian Qian suddenly said, Congratulations. Yi Xian nodded slightly, then looked at Grand Elder Chen. Is there something I can help you with, Grand Elder? Grand Elder Chen nodded slightly. Young friend, I'm afraid your current strength has reached the Tao-breaking realm. Tao-breaking? Yi Xian said gravely. What realm are Emperor Shi and the others at? Tao-breaking? Grand Elder Chen shook his head. I can only say that they are infinitely close to Tao-breaking, but they have not truly entered the Tao-breaking realm. Yi Xian asked again. Are there any Tao-breaking experts here? Grand Elder Chen said gravely. There are. But very few, only 2. And they haven't appeared for a very, very long time. I don't know if they are still alive. Tao-breaking realm. Yi Xian fell silent. Even in the 4-dimensional universe, he still had a long way to go. Yi Xian was about to speak, but at this moment, in the distant horizon, the 5-dimensional barrier suddenly trembled violently. Yi Xian and the other 2 hurriedly looked up. Under everyone's gaze, the 5th dimension under everyone's gazes, the talisman characters on the 5-dimensional barrier slowly dissipated. What's going on? Everyone frowned. Lian Qian looked at the 5-dimensional barrier, and her pupils constricted. Not good. They're going to destroy the restriction. Destroy the restriction? Yi Xian said gravely. Wasn't this set up by the prophet? How could it be destroyed? Lian Qian stared fixedly at the 5-dimensional barrier. It was done by one of our own. One of our own. Yi Xian frowned. Miss Lian Qian, what's the meaning of this? Lian Qian said gravely. The Myriad Dimensions Academy. This restriction was set up by Master. If others want to break it, it'll be as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Only our own people can break it. No, not break it, but remove it. At this point, she took a deep breath. Someone is using the knowledge Master taught them to remove this restriction. Grand Elder Chen said, This is a good thing. Idiot. Lian Qian suddenly said angrily. This is a good thing? Do you know what's between the 4-dimensional universe and the 5-dimensional universe? It's a space dimension that you can't cross. Once it's removed, the power of this space dimension will directly devour your 4-dimensional universe. Of course, people like you are strong enough to resist this power, but what about others? Is everyone in the 4-dimensional universe as strong as you? Once this power enters the 4-dimensional universe, not even a blade of grass will grow. Hearing this, Grand Elder Chen was silent. In fact, after cultivating to this point, he might have some compassion in his heart. But right now, he couldn't sacrifice himself to help Song Mountain. What did Song Mountain have to do with him? Was it selfish? It wasn't selfish. After all, they didn't have the obligation to save the world. In the starry sky, the runes became fewer and fewer. Around them, more and more people appeared. Emperor Shi and Taoist Mountain Ghost also appeared. At this time, Many people were excited because they discovered that the restriction was becoming weaker and weaker. Once it disappeared completely, it meant that they could enter the five-dimensional universe. At this time, only a blood-red rune was left in the sky. The rune just floated there, and the barrier had completely disappeared. In the field, someone suddenly said, "Break this rune and you can directly enter the five-dimensional universe." Hearing this, everyone looked at the blood-red rune. At this time, Lian Qian suddenly said, "No." Everyone looked at Lian Qian, and she said in a low voice, "If you break this rune, you can enter the five-dimensional universe. However, if you break this rune, the power of the spatial dimension will enter the four-dimensional universe. At that time, your universe will be destroyed." In the distance, a middle-aged man said indifferently, "What does this have to do with us?" Lian Qian looked at the middle-aged man and didn't say anything. She knew that these people wouldn't sacrifice their future for the living beings of the four-dimensional universe. This was human nature. She didn't have the qualifications to stand on the moral high ground and criticize them. At this time, a middle-aged man suddenly rushed into the sky. Immediately, a powerful force directly blasted the blood-red rune. Boom! The blood-red rune instantly shattered, and the space there suddenly split open. At this time, a middle-aged man in white appeared in everyone's line of sight. Chen Tian, Lian Qian, who was beside Yi Xian, suddenly said in a low voice, "The current school master of the Myriad Dimensions Academy." The middle-aged man smiled. "If everyone wants to enter the five-dimensional universe, there's one more thing you have to do." After saying this, he looked at Yi Xian below. "Kill him and use his head to exchange for a pass to the five-dimensional universe. P.S. I'll give everyone another red packet. Remember to snatch it." Chapter 848. Kill Yi Xian. All the spectators were stunned when they heard this. Kill Yi Xian in exchange for a pass. Soon, the expressions of many people became extremely unsightly. Kill with a borrowed knife. This expert from the fifth dimension wanted to borrow their hands to kill Yi Xian. In other words, he wanted them to fight with Yi Xian. Those who had lived to this age naturally understood Chen Tian's intentions. Not far away, Yi Xian looked at Chen Tian. "It seems that your real target is me." Chen Tian sized up Yi Xian and smiled. "Of course it's you." Yi Xian opened his palm, and the World Prism Pagoda appeared in his hand. "You want it?" Saying this, he suddenly put it away and grinned. "I'm not giving it to you." Chen Tian was not angry. He smiled. "It's fine, I can get it myself." Saying this, he looked at the experts from the fourth dimension. "This is your only chance in this lifetime. As long as you kill him, I can let you enter the fifth dimension." Kill Yi Xian. Everyone was silent. If Yi Xian was easy to kill, they would definitely not hesitate. However, was Yi Xian easy to kill? The problem was that he was not easy to kill. Moreover, could this person's words be trusted? What if they fought with Yi Xian and both sides were injured? What if he refused to let them enter? Wouldn't that be stupid? At this time, Taoist Mountain Ghost suddenly said, "Your Excellency, we just want to enter the fifth dimension, that's all." Chen Tian looked at Taoist Mountain Ghost and smiled. "But you were born in the fourth dimension." Taoist Mountain Ghost asked, "Can't we go to the fifth dimension if we were born in the fourth dimension?" Chen Tian shook his head and smiled. "That's not it. It's just that I was the one who broke teacher's restriction, so I have the right to decide who can enter or not, right?" Taoist Mountain Ghost still wanted to say something, but Chen Tian said, "I don't have much time, so you better not waste it. Otherwise, you will regret it later." Taoist Mountain Ghost fell silent. Everyone else was silent as well. In the air, Chen Tian looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "As long as one is alive, it's fine to not be strong. However, one must know one's own limits. What kind of strength you have, what kind of things you should have. If you overestimate yourself, your ending won't be too good." Yi Xian smiled and said, "If I give you the pagoda, will you let us go?" Chen Tian laughed. "You won't because you are a swordsman. A swordsman's sword can be broken, but it cannot be bent. Therefore, you would never beg for life in this way. I also advise you not to think of playing any tricks. In the face of absolute power, all conspiracies and schemes are useless. Yi Xian smiled. Why don't you go look for her first? This she was naturally the woman in a plain dress. Chen Tian laughed and said, because you are easier to kill. Yi Xian fell silent. These fellows weren't stupid. They knew how to fight first. At this moment, Chen Tian looked at Taoist Mountain Ghost and the others who were not far away. Have you thought it through? Taoist Mountain Ghost looked at Chen Tian. Do you think we are idiots? No one would attack Yi Xian. Firstly, Yi Xian was not easy to kill. Secondly, even if they killed Yi Xian, Chen Tian might not let them enter the fifth dimension. It was very stupid to pin their hopes on other people's pity. In the air, Chen Tian smiled slightly. Very good. As he said that, he spread out his palm and pressed down lightly. The space behind him suddenly split open and soon, an extremely powerful aura spread out from behind him. The expressions of everyone in the surroundings changed when they sensed this force. Dimensional power. This was not something the four-dimensional universe could withstand. In the distance, Taoist Mountain Ghost stared at Chen Tian. You want to destroy the four-dimensional universe? Me. Chen Tian shook his head and smiled. Are you kidding me? You should know that it was you who destroyed the last restriction rune. Therefore, you are the ones who want to destroy your universe. As his voice fell, a black gas spread out from behind him. Everywhere this black gas passed, space turned into nothingness and disappeared completely. Sensing the power of this black gas, everyone's expression became extremely ugly. If this endless black gas was allowed to enter the four-dimensional universe, the entire four-dimensional universe would really be devoured. In the air, Chen Tian looked down at everyone and smiled. Are you afraid? As he said that, he looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, I can give you a chance. If you hand over the pagoda then your ancestors. Yi Xian suddenly shouted angrily. In the next moment, a sword light soared into the sky and slashed at Chen Tian. In the air, Chen Tian narrowed his eyes and punched out. Bang! A few dozen feet in front of his fist, the sword light was forced to stop. And at this moment, a blood-red prisoner character appeared above Chen Tian's head. Sensing this, Chen Tian's pupil shrank. Immediately after, he turned around and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already thousands of feet away. Chen Tian stared at Yi Xian with a sinister expression. That Xiao Ta actually recognized you as his master. Yi Xian ignored Chen Tian and turned to look at Taoist Mountain Ghost and the others. Everyone, we want to go to the fifth dimension, but we will not go in kneeling. Go in kneeling. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the blood of the four-dimensional experts started boiling. They were all people who had cultivated for tens of thousands of years. How could they not have any self-respect? How could they not have any backbone? Yes, everyone wanted to go to the fifth dimension. They all wanted to break through and live forever. But not by kneeling down and begging for it. It was good for people to live, but if they did not have dignity and backbone, then they might as well be dogs. At this time, Taoist Mountain Ghost suddenly said softly, Little friend Yi Xian is right. As a person, we must have some dignity and backbone. As he said this, he looked at Chen Tian. We, the people of the fourth dimension, are indeed not as strong as the experts of the fifth dimension. However, we don't need your charity, nor do we need your pity. Chen Tian laughed. You have a backbone. Unfortunately, what's the use? Your four-dimensional universe is about to be destroyed. Isn't that right? Taoist Mountain Ghost laughed. Today, the old man will protect the four-dimensional universe. Not for anything else but to fight for pride. Of course, the old man really doesn't like you. As his voice fell, he suddenly turned into a black light and soared into the sky. In the starry sky, he clenched his right hand and pressed it down. He roared, Sky-supporting pillar. Boom! A huge black hand that was a few hundred meters long suddenly tore through the space above his head. And then the huge hand directly grabbed the black aura. However, as soon as it came into contact with the black aura, the huge hand started to turn illusory. Seeing this, Taoist Mountain Ghost's expression suddenly became serious. The black gas was stronger than he had imagined. At this time, Emperor Shi, who was not far away, suddenly looked at Chen Tian and laughed. Are the people of the fifth dimension superior to the people of the fourth dimension? I also don't like you. As his voice fell, he suddenly stomped his right foot. Boom! A powerful white beam of light soared into the sky. This white light directly collided with the black gas. Rumble! In the starry sky, the black gas trembled violently. However, this white light was unable to stop them. In the sky, Chen Tian looked down at Emperor Shi and Taoist mountain ghost. He laughed. You don't want to take the road to life, but you insist on taking the road to death. Just because of your so-called backbone and dignity, how ridiculous. As he said this, he looked at Yi Xian. Just as he was about to speak, Yi Xian suddenly disappeared. Chi! A wisp of sword light tore through the battlefield. Chen Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. Hiss! Before he could finish speaking, a blood-red prisoner character suddenly appeared above his head. At the same time, a mysterious force enveloped him. Sword domain. Chen Tian's expression was calm. He clenched his fists tightly. Boom! The blood-red prisoner character above his head directly became illusory. At the same time, the sword light in front of him was forced to stop. Chen Tian stared at Yi Xian. The sword is a good sword, and the divine skill is a good divine skill. Unfortunately, in my eyes, you are too weak. As his voice fell, he fiercely punched out. Boom! Yi Xian instantly appeared tens of thousands of feet away. As soon as he stopped, the space within thousands of feet behind him directly exploded, turning into nothingness. Chen Tian frowned slightly. Your physical body. He did not expect that Yi Xian would be able to withstand his attack. In the distance, Yi Xian stretched his muscles, and then looked at the distant Taoist mountain ghost. At this moment, Taoist mountain ghost suddenly said, Little friend Yi Xian, we can't hold on any longer. Yi Xian looked at the black gas. The black gas was increasing in number. Taoist mountain ghost and emperor, she could no longer hold on. After pondering for a moment, Yi Xian looked at Pavilion Elder Chun and the others below. Everyone, if the nest is overturned, how can the eggs remain unbroken? We are now people on the same boat. We will prosper together. And if we suffer together, we will suffer together. Only by joining forces can we survive. At this moment, Chen Tian, who was not far away, suddenly laughed. No, we are only targeting you, not them. Hearing this, the fourth dimension experts suddenly hesitated. At this moment, Pavilion Elder Chen suddenly stood up. Everyone, little friend Yi is right. If the nest is overturned, how can the eggs remain unbroken? If we do not help Taoist Mountain Ghost and little friend Yi now, in the future, we will find that no one will help us. Moreover, at this point, he looked at Chen Tian and laughed sinisterly. Moreover, the old man is also very unhappy with this person. Fight with him. Let them know that the people of the fourth dimension are not ants. We are not people that they can bully as they please. As his voice fell, he directly turned into a beam of white light and soared into the sky. Behind Pavilion Elder Chen, Chen Shi, and more than 20 top experts of the fourth dimension attacked one after another. Boom boom boom. In the starry sky, as Pavilion Elder Chen and the others attacked one after another, the speed at which the black gas spread instantly slowed down. However, it did not stop. Instead, the black gas increased in number. In the distance, Chen Tian was silent. He had originally wanted to use the experts of the fourth dimension to target Yi Xian, but he did not expect that these people would choose not to. Moreover, these people had come to oppose him. He had to admit that he had underestimated the people of the fourth dimension. Recollecting his thoughts, Chen Tian looked at Yi Xian, who was not far away. I don't want to waste time. Aren't you a swordsman? Then I will let you die under my sword. As his voice fell, a sword suddenly appeared in his hand. The next moment, this sword suddenly flew out and slashed at Yi Xian. The moment this sword appeared, Lian Qian's horrified voice suddenly rang in Yi Xian's mind. Not good. This is the fifth dimension's third sword. It is not something you can resist. At this point, she suddenly stopped. Had Yi Xian ever been afraid of a sword? At this moment, Yi Xian's expression suddenly changed. His face was filled with terror, as if he had been shocked to the extreme. Seeing this, Chen Tian smiled. Chapter 849. A sword descended in a straight line through the starry sky. The sword was completely snow-white, and there was a speck of blood red at its tip. It was like a plum blossom in the snow, and it carried a trace of coldness amidst its beauty. Yi Xian seemed to be extremely terrified as he watched the sword descend. The expressions of Taoist mountain ghost and the others instantly became unsightly when they saw the expression on Yi Xian's face. They could be said to be one with Yi Xian, so they naturally didn't want anything to happen to Yi Xian, because if something were to happen to Yi Xian, then it was equivalent to losing a formidable ally. But now it seemed like something bad was about to happen. Meanwhile, the sword had arrived above Yi Xian. It was very calm and didn't emanate any energy fluctuations, but everyone knew that it couldn't be ordinary. But right at this moment, Chen Tian's expression suddenly changed, because he noticed that while Yi Xian had a terrified expression on his face, Yi Xian showed no signs of fleeing or counterattacking. Something's not right. Chen Tian didn't hesitate to withdraw the sword. However, Yi Xian suddenly shot into the sky. He was extremely swift and collided with the sword, and then the sword instantly pierced through his head and into his body. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned when they witnessed this scene. What's Yi Xian trying to do? Chen Tian was slightly stunned as well. He hadn't expected that Yi Xian would actually do this. Is he giving his life away? Right at this moment, his pupils constricted, because he noticed that Yi Xian was completely fine after the sword pierced into Yi Xian's body. Moreover, Yi Xian's aura had grown even stronger. What the hell is going on? Chen Tian stared fixedly at Yi Xian, and his intuition told him that he might have done something extremely stupid. Yi Xian greedily took a deep breath, and his aura rose explosively. This time he didn't suppress it. He couldn't, because the power contained within this sword was too terrifying. It was more terrifying than any sword he had absorbed before. It could be said that this sword was infinitely close to his executing heaven sword and soul-suppressing sword. He had to break through. Yi Xian was shocked. Breaking through at this time? Wasn't that asking for death? Chen Tian also noticed that Yi Xian was about to break through because Yi Xian's aura was still rising crazily. Chen Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He was just about to attack when Yi Xian suddenly said, "Chen Tian, you old dog. You're not human." Everyone. Chen Tian looked at Yi Xian. "What? Do you want to have a civil battle with me?" Yi Xian said angrily. "Chen Tian." At this time, Chen Tian suddenly interrupted Yi Xian. "You're trying to buy time. That's a good idea." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished, and a powerful force swept down from the sky. Everywhere this force passed, space was instantly reduced to ashes. In front of Chen Tian, the four-dimensional space was as fragile as rotten wood. Yi Xian's face instantly sank when he saw this. He was about to break through now, so how could he resist? Right at this moment, a woman suddenly appeared in front of him. Yi Xian was stunned when he saw this person. Enlancio. Enlancio stared fixedly at Chen Tian, who was charging down. "Break through quickly." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly transformed into a spear light that shot into the sky, and her spear was like a thunderclap that carried the might to pierce through the sky. Yi Xian didn't think too much about it, and hurriedly sat down cross-legged. Break through. He had to break through as soon as possible. In midair, Chen Tian watched Enlancio charge at him with an expressionless face, and he smashed his fist against the spear in Enlancio's hand. Boom! The spear light in Enlancio's hand instantly exploded, and at the same time, Enlancio instantly retreated. Because her retreat speed was too fast, her body directly tore through space, and fresh blood unceasingly flowed out of her mouth. Chen Tian's strength was too great, and it wasn't something her body could withstand. Chen Tian didn't care about Enlancio, and he directly charged towards Yi Xian below. Compared to Enlancio, he wanted to get rid of Yi Xian even more, because Yi Xian had given him too many surprises. Just as Chen Tian appeared above Yi Xian's head, a man suddenly blocked in front of Yi Xian. Emocia. Emocia looked up at Chen Tian, who was hovering above his head. Suddenly, he let out an enraged roar and charged directly toward Chen Tian. As he did, the illusory image of an old man appeared behind him. This illusory image was even more solid and powerful than before. Clearly, In this period of time, Emosie's strength had greatly increased. In the air, Chen Tian glanced at Emosie, and he stomped down with his foot. Boom! The phantom instantly exploded, and Emosie's entire body fell from the sky. As he fell, his body cracked open layer by layer, and fresh blood spurted out. Chen Tian looked down at Yi Xian. He was just about to attack again, when a sword light suddenly appeared behind him. The speed of this sword was faster than lightning. Chen Tian's brows creased slightly, and he turned around and punched out. Rumble! At the point where the fist and sword met, a powerful force suddenly exploded out, and a petite figure retreated explosively in the starry sky. This person was Xiao Qi. Xiao Qi retreated a few thousand meters before stopping. However, the moment she stopped, she raised her sword above her head with both hands. She stared at the distant Chen Tian, and her sword suddenly slashed downwards. Heaven-breaking sword. Qi. A strand of sword light shot out from the tip of Xiao Qi's sword. Qi. The starry sky was torn apart. This sword, like its name, could break the heavens. In the distance, Chen Tian was expressionless. Just as the sword energy was about to slash his body suddenly became illusory, and then the sword energy mysteriously disappeared. On the other side, Xiao Qi's expression suddenly changed, and she suddenly turned around. Instant sword. Just as she finished speaking, her body disappeared like a ray of light. Chi, wrong. The space in front of her was suddenly torn apart by countless sword lights. In less than half a breath's time, the space was directly torn apart by thousands of sword lights. And these sword lights appeared almost at the same time. Instant. In fact, it wasn't just one sword instant but 1,000 swords instant. In an instant 1,000 swords appeared. Meanwhile, the space that was enveloped by the rays of light suddenly exploded apart. Rumble. A figure rapidly retreated in the starry sky. It was Xiao Qi. Xiao Qi suddenly held her sword vertically between her eyebrows. Protect. As soon as she finished speaking, strands of sword qi suddenly appeared behind her. These strands of sword qi instantly formed a sword shield behind her, and it didn't take long for her to stop. However, a trace of blood seeped out from the corner of her mouth. In that pitch-black space, Chen Tian walked out. He stared at Xiao Qi, and there were actually 3 sword scars on his face. At this moment, he had to admit that although the overall strength of the 4th dimension was far inferior to the 5th dimension, there were still many people in the 4th dimension who were very outstanding. Whether it was Yi Xian just now, or these 3 people who just appeared, even in the 5th dimension, they were all at the peak. Especially this little girl in front of him. The strength of her sword Dao had exceeded his expectations. At this moment, Xiao Qi, Emosie, and Enlancio all arrived beside Yi Xian. Although Emosie's injuries were more serious, fortunately, he had the spring of life, so it wasn't fatal. Xiao Qi glanced at Yi Xian below. He still needs an hour. An hour. In other words, they had to stop Chen Tian for an hour. In the distance, Chen Tian glanced at Xiao Qi's group of 3. It's time to end this. In the next moment he suddenly vanished. Xiao Qi's group of 3's expressions instantly changed. They were just about to attack, when Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of them. They were stunned when they saw Yi Xian. He broke through? In next to no time, their expressions sank. Because Yi Xian hadn't broken through. Moreover, Yi Xian's aura was extremely chaotic, and he showed signs of qi deviation. Yi Xian stared fixedly at Chen Tian who was charging at him. He suddenly opened his palm, and a strand of sword energy suddenly flew along his arm into his palm. When they saw this strand of sword energy, everyone's expressions changed. Chen Tian even stopped and retreated almost 30 kilometers in a frenzy. Chen Tian stared fixedly at the strand of sword energy in Yi Xian's hand, and his eyes were filled with fear. Yi Xian took a deep breath. It was one of the 3 strands of sword energy that the woman in a plain dress had given him. It could be said that it was his greatest trump card. He'd never used it. Even if it was extremely dangerous at times, he still hadn't used it. Because he wanted to return it to her when he met her again. And he wanted to tell her that he'd grown up. But at this moment, he had no choice but to use it. He knew that even if the 4 of them joined forces, they wouldn't be able to defeat Chen Tian. Moreover, if he allowed Xiao Qi and the others to stop Chen Tian, then the three of them might die. He didn't want anything to happen to Xiao Qi and the others. Moreover, he didn't want Xiao Qi and the others to be beaten half to death before he utilized this strand of sword energy. He didn't want anything to happen to them at all. His younger sister had left him all along the way, so he didn't want to lose any more friends. Yi Xian looked at Chen Tian in the distance and said softly, "Go." As soon as he said that, the strand of sword energy in his hand flew out. In the distance, Chen Tian's pupils suddenly shrank, and he suddenly put his hands together. Heaven and earth converge. As soon as he said that, the space in front of him suddenly closed, and at the same time, mysterious forces continuously gathered in front of him. At this moment, the strand of sword light suddenly disappeared. Chen Tian's body suddenly stiffened, and the space in front of him cracked and then disappeared. Everyone looked at Chen Tian, and there was a strand of sword energy in between Chen Tian's eyebrows. He was killed just like that. Everyone was stunned. In the distant endless starry sky, a woman in a plain dress stopped. She tilted her head slightly, and with 2 fingers, she gently held a strand of her hair and said softly, "Did you use it?" The strand of sword energy between Chen Tian's eyebrows suddenly vanished, and then Chen Tian's figure instantly became ethereal. Chen Tian stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "It's only just begun." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure vanished. Everyone in the surroundings instantly heaved sighs of relief when they witnessed this scene. But right at this moment, an explosion suddenly resounded in the sky, and then a man walked out from there. Everyone was stunned when they saw the man. "Chen Tian. It's Chen Tian again." The expressions of everyone here instantly became extremely unsightly. Yi Xian's face had turned gloomy as well. Meanwhile, Lian Qian's voice suddenly resounded in his mind. That person from before was only his clone, and this is his clone as well. Yi Xian spoke solemnly. "How many clones does he have?" Lian Qian replied, "This is his second and final clone, and it possesses 30% of his strength." 30% of his strength. Yi Xian fell silent. He clenched his right fist tightly, and no one knew what he was thinking. Chen Tian walked down slowly from midair, and his gaze descended onto Yi Xian. "Do you have any other trump cards?" Yi Xian opened his palm, and another strand of sword energy appeared. Another strand of sword energy. Chen Tian glanced at Yi Xian, and then he suddenly waved his right hand lightly. Something seemed to have been torn open in the distant sky, and it didn't take long for countless strands of black energy to surge out like tidewater. Taoist Mountain Ghost and the others hurriedly retreated when they witnessed this scene. Even though the black energy from before was formidable, they were still barely able to resist it. But now the amount of black energy wasn't just countless times greater than before, it was countless times stronger as well. Endless black energy spread out from behind Chen Tian, and this black energy spread out in all directions at an extremely fast speed. Chen Tian looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "In the void behind me, there is a space-devouring beast. This beast lives by devouring the power of the space dimension, and it can use it for its own purposes. Of course, this isn't the main point. The main point is that if you choose to kill me, this beast will devour your entire 4-dimensional universe. Make your choice." Yi Xian fell silent. At this moment, Taoist Mountain Ghost suddenly spoke in a deep voice. "Young friend, this black energy has appeared in many places in the 4-dimensional universe. I can't resist it." Yi Xian glanced around, and this time, he looked very far away. This black energy had already appeared in many places. Deity's Templar, Black Yellow Great World, and even the faraway Qingcheng. Facing this endless black energy, he saw the despair in many people's eyes. Deity's Templars Zhu Xie Yuan Xiaodao, Northern regions Jiangjiu, Lian Wanli, Shangguan Xian, or everyone could only wait for death. Only the experts here could barely resist it. However, they could only barely resist it. This was because this black gas would devour the entire 4-dimensional universe. Yi Xian turned to look at Xiao Qi and the other two. Xiao Qi shrugged. "I'm not afraid of death. It's just a pity that I can't go to the 5th dimension to take a look." And Lanxiu glanced at Yi Xian, but she didn't say anything. Emosia smiled slightly. I've tried my best. Actually, I'm also a little regretful. I also want to see what kind of world the fifth dimension is like. Unfortunately, I won't have the chance. Yi Xian shook his head. We have to live well. Everyone has to live well too. After that, I'll take you to the fifth dimension. As his voice fell, Yi Xian raised his head and looked into the depths of the starry sky. In the depths of the starry sky, he vaguely saw a pair of huge black eyes. After a moment of silence, the sword qi in Yi Xian's hand suddenly soared into the sky. This strand of sword qi directly entered the depths of the starry sky. He chose to kill the space-devouring beast. Ah! In the depths of the starry sky, a mournful scream suddenly rang out. Soon, all the black energy in the surroundings began to slowly disappear. Yi Xian said softly, Did I save the world? In some unknown starry sky, the woman in the plain dress slowly closed her eyes. After a moment she said softly, Back then, I entered the path of destruction by exterminating all living beings. Now, you use my sword qi to save all living beings. Saying this, she looked into the depths of the starry sky and said softly, What a good karma! Brother, every cause has an effect. You are the only karma that I can't cut off. P.S. When I published it today, I checked it twice. I hope there are no typos. Now every time I finish writing, I check it more than twice. Chapter 850. Karma. There must be a cause and effect. To the plain-dressed woman, no matter how strong the karma was, it could not touch her. That was because her sword could sever all karma. However, she did not want to sever this karma. She also knew very well that as long as she did not cut off the relationship between her and Yi Xian, she would have a lot of troubles ahead of her. Some troubles could not be solved with a sword. They could even ruin her sword doctrine heart. But she never regretted it. There was only one person who could let her karma touch her. There was only one person who could destroy her sword heart. There was only one person who could make her feel that living was meaningful, invincible. In this life, she did not want to be defeated. Who could defeat her? Longevity? In this life, she did not want to die. Who could kill her? In the starry sky, after the black gas disappeared, Yi Xian looked at Chen Tian. He knew that things were not over yet. What Chen Tian did just now was actually to force him to hand over the sword energy. And he had to hand over the sword energy. He, Yi Xian, was a secular person and a selfish person. He did not have the thought of saving the world and longevity as his responsibility. He simply did not want anything to happen to his friends. And he had many friends and people he cared about. Temple and Jussier, and those people from Black Yellow Great World Jiangjiu, Mo Yunqi, Baizhe, Shengguan Siener etc. These people were people he cared about. As Jiangjiu had said, he Yi Xian not only had a sister, but he also had many friends and people he cared about. He did not want to be a lonely swordsman. He did not want to be a swordsman who was selfish to his friends. At this moment, Yi Xian's face suddenly turned pale, and the aura around him started to become chaotic. He could not suppress it anymore. Just now, he had been suppressing the energy after devouring the sword energy. But now he could not suppress it anymore. He was about to break through. Yi Xian was about to speak when Shaoqi suddenly said, You break through first. The three of us will stop him. Yi Xian shook his head. Danger, Seven said. I have no choice. You have to break through. If you do, along with your trump cards, you might be able to fight him. Yi Xian thought for a moment, then nodded. He sat down cross-legged and focused on absorbing the energy in his body. Shaoqi and the other two stood in front of Yi Xian. In the distance, Chen Tian looked at Shaoqi and the other two. The three of you are not bad. If you are willing, you can follow me to the multidimensional academy in the fifth dimension to study. Saying this, he smiled faintly. You guys might not know what entering the Myriad Dimensions Academy means. It means that you guys... Emosia suddenly asked. Do you have any friends? Chen Tian looked at Emosia. Naturally. Emosia smiled and said, Will you betray your friend? Chen Tian thought about it, then smiled and said, I won't. Emosia faintly smiled. We won't either. Chen Tian looked at Emosia. You will die. Emosia softly said. A true friend can live and die together. Chen Tian looked at Yi Xian for a long time, then nodded. You are very loyal. However, I want to see if you are really loyal. Saying this, he suddenly disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in front of Emosia. Before Emosia could react, Chen Tian's hand was already on his throat. At this moment, a sword stopped behind Chen Tian. The moment Chen Tian made his move, Seven also made his move. However, she was still too slow. This doppelganger was much stronger than the previous one. Chen Tian looked at Emosia in his hand and started to exert force. Soon, Emosia's body became illusory. Chen Tian smiled and said, You should know that I will really kill you. I am not joking with you. However, I still want to give you a chance. As long as you nod and are willing to go to the 5th dimension with me, I can let you live. Emosia looked at Chen Tian and smiled. I want to go to the 5th dimension to take a look. However, I don't want to kneel there. Chen Tian's hand started to exert force, and a mysterious force suddenly surged into Emosia's body. Ah! Emosia suddenly raised his head and roared. At this moment, his pupils actually exploded. Not only that, the bones in his body also started to slowly crack. At this moment, Seven no longer hesitated and directly slashed at Chen Tian. Chen Tian didn't even turn his head and waved his hand. Boom! A powerful force instantly sent Seven flying. At this moment, a long spear suddenly stabbed down from the top of his head. Chen Tian's right foot lightly stomped. Boom! The space above his head suddenly collapsed, and the powerful force directly sent Enlancio flying. Chen Tian continued to look at Emosia. It isn't easy for people to live, especially for geniuses like you. It is even more difficult for you to reach this stage. You have to think carefully. Is it really worth it to sacrifice your life for a so-called brother? Emosia clenched his fists and his facial features twisted. On his forehead, veins popped out, and he looked incomparably malevolent. Pain. At this moment, he was enduring an unbearable torture. Chen Tian stared at Emosia. As long as you say the word, you can live. Not only can you live even better. Emosia suddenly roared. Brother Yi, take good care of my clansmen. As his voice faded, his body suddenly started burning his soul to self-destruct. Chen Tian narrowed his eyes. At this moment, a voice came from the side. Let him go. Chen Tian turned to look at the nearby Yi Xian. Yi Xian stared deadly at Chen Tian. He opened his palm and the prism pagoda appeared in his hand. Let him go. This is for you. Chen Tian laughed. Even if you don't give it to me, I can take it. Yi Xian said, You should know that it has already recognized me as its master. If my brother dies, I will detonate it. I will do what I say. Chen Tian looked at Yi Xian, but he didn't say anything. At this moment, Emosia was completely burning. At most a few breaths of time, he would completely disappear. Yi Xian suddenly roared. The prism pagoda appeared between his eyebrows. In the next moment, the prism pagoda started shaking. Seeing this, Chen Tian squinted his eyes. His right hand lightly exerted strength, and a force shattered the flames around Emosia. However, he was still a bit too slow. At this moment, Emosia's body completely disappeared, leaving only his soul. Moreover, this soul was extremely ethereal, as if it could disappear at any moment. Chen Tian looked at Yi Xian. Give it to me. Yi Xian stared deadly at Chen Tian. With a point of his finger, the prism pagoda flew right in front of Chen Tian. Chen Tian let go. The moment he let go of Emosia, his pupils suddenly shrank. He saw Yi Xian suddenly roar. Old dog, my brother isn't someone you can touch. As his voice faded, a sword aura suddenly flew out of his hand. Sword aura again. Yi Xian originally didn't want to use this sword aura, because it truly was his last trump card. He wanted to save it for a critical moment, but now, seeing Emosia's body destroyed, he didn't want to think about anything else. Seeing this, Chen Tian's expression changed greatly. He frantically retreated, but the sword aura was even faster, instantly piercing through his forehead. Chi! Chen Tian's body instantly became ethereal. Chen Tian looked at Yi Xian. He was just about to speak, when a sword suddenly flew out of Yi Xian's hand. This flying sword sliced through Chen Tian's throat. Chen Tian instantly disappeared. At this moment, Yi Xian's mouth spat out a mouthful of essence blood. Just now, he was at a critical moment, but seeing Xia almost be forced to burn her soul and self-destruct, he had to forcefully stop. Now he was starting to suffer the backlash. Yi Xian didn't care about his body. He looked at Xia. Right now, Xia's body was extremely ethereal, as if it could disappear at any moment. At this moment, Little Soul's voice suddenly rang out. "Young master, I can save him." Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Hurry." As he spoke, he quickly took out the soul-suppressing sword. Little Soul directly absorbed Xia into the sword. Little Soul said, "His soul is very weak. It will take a period of time to recover." Yi Xian breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. He looked up at the horizon. "Brother Mo, don't worry. I will take you to the 5th dimension. Let's go there together." After saying that, he immediately sat down cross-legged. Breakthrough. He had to break through as soon as possible because he knew that things weren't over yet. Everyone present knew that things weren't over yet. Although the 5th dimension barrier had been broken, at the end of their line of sight was pitch black. In that pitch black space, everyone could feel a powerful force. A force from the 5th dimension, and Lanxiu and Xiaoqi walked to Yi Xian's side. Xiaoqi looked up at the depths of the starry sky and softly said, "Perhaps the 5th dimension barrier isn't a bad thing." The 4th dimension was naturally much weaker than the 5th dimension. Under such circumstances, if the two universes didn't have any restrictions, the 4th dimension would really be slaughtered by others. Just like just now, if it weren't for Yi Xian's sword light, the 4th dimension would probably have been destroyed in a day. But now that the restrictions were gone, the fate of the 4th dimension was in the hands of the experts of the 5th dimension. At this time, not far away, a middle-aged man suddenly said, "I'll try." As he spoke, he suddenly soared into the sky. Obviously, he still wanted to go to the 5th dimension. This was also normal. After all, the restrictions had been broken, and the 5th dimension was close at hand. How could he not be tempted? However, before he could approach that area, a white light directly blasted his body. Boom! The middle-aged man's body directly turned to ashes. Seeing this scene, everyone's expression immediately sank. The people of the 5th dimension didn't want the experts of the 4th dimension to go up. Everyone looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian's aura was getting stronger and stronger. A breakthrough was imminent. At this time, Lian Qian suddenly appeared beside Yi Xian. She glanced at the people present, and then raised her head to look at the depths of the starry sky. She frowned slightly. After a while, Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian. She just looked at Yi Xian silently. At this time, Xiaoqi walked to Lian Qian's side and softly said, "What's wrong?" Lian Qian shook her head. "Originally, I hoped that he would become stronger before going to the 5th dimension. Unfortunately, I didn't expect that the people above wouldn't give him any chance." As she spoke, she shook her head again. "He won't survive. It can be said that he is now the public enemy of the 5th dimension. The people of the 4th dimension only know that Xiao Ta can go to the 5th dimension. They don't know the real use of this pagoda. But the people of the 5th dimension know the real use of this pagoda. For this pagoda, they will risk their lives." Xiaoqi was silent. At this time, Lian Qian said again, "If I'm not wrong, they might have already made a move on that plain-dressed woman. Because this time, not a single expert from the Myriad Dimensions Academy came. They must be targeting that plain-dressed woman." Chapter 851. Against the plain-dressed woman. Why were the experts of the 5th dimension unable to obtain the World Prism Pagoda? The reason was because of the plain-dressed woman. She was the one who had been obstructing the experts of the 5th dimension. Without her, Yi Xian would not have been able to live until now. It could be said that the plain-dressed woman was their greatest enemy. And they were very clear that this woman was not easy to kill because they had already failed once. On the battlefield, Lian Qian's expression was gloomy the entire time. Xiaoqi and the rest simply did not know the situation of the 5th dimension. The people of that universe could not be compared to the people of the 4th dimension. Especially the Myriad Dimensions Academy. In the past, the Myriad Dimensions Academy could be said to be the most powerful force in the entire fifth dimension. Naturally, the members of the Myriad Dimensions Academy were all students and did not participate in worldly affairs. Because of this, the status of the Myriad Dimensions Academy in the fifth dimension was very high. She knew that the plain dress woman was very strong, but the Myriad Dimensions Academy was not weak either. Especially Chen Tian and that female teacher. Their strength could only be described as unfathomable. Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian with worry in her eyes. She naturally did not want anything to happen to Yi Xian. Her goal was to find her master, and this World Prism Pagoda was the key to finding her master. And if this World Prism Pagoda fell into Chen Tian's hands, would Chen Tian go and find her master? If it was a long time ago, he might have. But now, she was very clear that Chen Tian definitely would not, because power was very tempting. Chen Tian was now the master of the Myriad Dimensions Academy, so he would not go and find his master. Moreover, if the World Prism Pagoda fell into Chen Tian's hands, the two sisters would once again be imprisoned in the pagoda. This was because Chen Tian would definitely not give up on their Tao laws. If they gathered their Tao laws, their might would be extremely terrifying. One must know that in the past, when the two sisters joined forces with the World Prism Pagoda, they fought against the three swordsmen. Although they lost, it was not because they and the World Prism Pagoda were weak, but because the three swordsmen were too strong. Therefore, if the World Prism Pagoda fell into Chen Tian's hands, it would be difficult for them to escape their fate. When they had followed the Prophet had never treated them as subordinates. But if they fell into the hands of Chen Tian, thinking of this, Lian Qian opened her palm, and the World Prism Pagoda suddenly appeared in her palm. Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian beside her. I'll buy you some time. Not much, maybe 2 or 3 months. As her voice fell, Lian Qian suddenly transformed into a beam of white light and shot up into the sky. Very quickly, she arrived in front of the black region. She looked at the black region in front of her, then at the World Prism Pagoda in her hands. She slowly closed her eyes. Haven't you always been curious about what Tao Law I am? Below, Yi Xian raised his head and looked at Lian Qian. The corners of Lian Qian's mouth lifted slightly. You'll know soon enough. With that, she suddenly opened her eyes. In the name of the pagoda seal, the World Prism Pagoda in her hands trembled violently. In the next moment, countless golden runes suddenly flew out of Lian Qian's body. Very quickly, these golden runes were like tiny butterflies that flew towards the black region. Soon, these golden runes formed a swastika character. And at this moment, a giant finger suddenly descended from the black region. This giant finger directly bombarded the swastika character. Boom! The swastika character trembled violently, but it did not shatter. On the contrary, the giant finger directly exploded. However, behind this giant finger, a giant black hand suddenly stretched out. Below, Lian Qian slowly closed her eyes. Seal the heavens and earth. As her voice fell, she suddenly opened her eyes. From within her body, a golden pillar of light suddenly shot up into the sky. This golden pillar of light directly entered the swastika character. The swastika character trembled violently and directly imprinted itself into the black region. Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors above, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From this moment onwards, Yi Xian's position as crown prince is removed. Yi Lang will succeed him. The one who spoke was an old man dressed in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang, and on both sides were the Yi clan's elders. Why? At this moment, a somewhat timid voice suddenly rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone looked over and saw a little girl standing at the door. The little girl was about 12 or 13 years old. Her 2 small hands were tightly gripping the corners of her skirt. Her face was sickly pale, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of timidity in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling. She was Yi Xian's younger sister. This time, when she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian from his position, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall, and said timidly, "Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is a crown prince. Why did you remove his title for no reason?" The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. "This is a matter of the clan. What are you interrupting? Leave." Yi Ling was obviously afraid, and did not dare to look at the Great Elder. However, she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage, and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed again to the elders on both sides. "Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan. He is fighting with his life on the line for the clan. It is unknown whether he is alive or dead. Yet the clan is using a groundless excuse to remove his title. This is really unfair. Impudent." The Great Elder suddenly raged. "Whether he is removed or not, it is not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this moment, the new crown prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. "You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others." The Great Elder said coldly, "Then flog 30 times. Soon 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years. Even now, he is fighting with his life on the line for the clan. The clan is so unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to show off. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of crown prince. What are you yelling about?" With that, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap! A crisp sound of the slap was heard. The right side of Yi Ling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry. She just covered her cheek with her hand. Yi Ling looked at the guard and smiled. "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. "I'm Zhang Mu. Greetings, Crown Prince." Yi Ling nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the Crown Prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He hurriedly bowed deeply. "I'm willing to go through fire and water for the Crown Prince." Yi Ling nodded slightly. "Drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't show any mercy. Do you understand?" Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped when he saw something. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking toward the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe. The robe was tattered and covered in blood. This young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a sinister smile. Inside the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes, his face dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. However, Yi Ling did not stop there. He charged at Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you?" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian looked up at him and said, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian ignored Zhang Mu and walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's appearance, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being cut by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be removed, and Yi Lang shall take over. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? At this time, a timid voice rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a hint of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian from his position, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is a prince. Why did you remove him for no reason? The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. This is a matter of the clan. Why are you interrupting? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid and did not dare to look directly at the Great Elder. However, she did not leave, and instead mustered up her courage to enter the ancestral hall. She bowed again to the elders on both sides. Elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan. He is fighting for the clan, and his life is uncertain. Yet, the clan is using a groundless excuse to remove him from his position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged. Whether he is removed or not, it is not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. You should be flogged 30 times as a warning. The Great Elder coldly replied. Then flog 30 times. Soon 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he is fighting for the clan. The clan is so unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince Yi Lang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered. Young Master Yi Lang is the heir, and it is the wish of everyone. What are you shouting about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap! A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. What's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed. Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince. Yi Lang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and hurriedly bowed. This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the prince, even if it means death. Yi Lang nodded. Drag him out. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't show mercy, understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu seemed to see something and suddenly stopped. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe, and the robe was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a sinister smile. Inside the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak, when Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. However, Yi Ling did not stop there, and charged towards Zhang Mu once more. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian looked up at him and snarled, Your man! As he spoke, he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, Prince, save me! Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage, and in the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 852. I beg you to be stronger. Hearing the woman's words, the smile on Chen Tian's face suddenly disappeared. The woman was arrogant, supercilious, possibly both, but his intuition told him that the woman in front of him was a bit stronger than they had expected. Of course, at this moment, he had no way of retreating. Moreover, there was no need for him to do so. All these years, what had Chen Tian not seen before? How could he retreat just because of one sentence from the woman in front of him? Of course, facing the woman in front of him, he was even more cautious. At this time, the woman in the distance suddenly said, "Start your performance?" Chen Tian looked at the woman in the plain dress. The woman in the plain dress had a calm expression. In her limpid eyes, there was not a trace of ripple. This was a special person. Chen Tian chuckled. "To be honest, you surprised many of us, because we never thought that a strong person like you would appear in the four-dimensional universe." The woman in the plain dress looked at Chen Tian. "As a person from the five-dimensional universe, do you have a sense of superiority?" Chen Tian laughed. "No, because we never compare ourselves with you four-dimensional people." Speaking up to here, he suddenly paused and then said, "Speaking of which, it seems that we do have a sense of superiority. However, isn't this normal? For example, when you face a race that is more backward than you, don't you also have a sense of superiority?" The woman in the plain dress said, "Superiority comes from inferiority. Finding a sense of superiority from those who are weaker than you is incompetent." Chen Tian looked at the woman in the plain dress. "In front of me, don't you also have a sense of superiority? What, do you also have inferiority and are incompetent?" The corner of the woman's mouth slightly raised. "Superiority? Have you ever seen a person have a sense of superiority when facing an ant?" Hearing this, Chen Tian narrowed his eyes. "Ant." The woman in the plain dress in front of him actually treated him as an ant. Chen Tian laughed. He laughed somewhat crazily. "In this life, no one has ever said that I am as weak as an ant. You are the first." The plain-dressed woman slowly walked towards Chen Tian. "If you don't start your performance, then you will lose this chance." Chen Tian looked at the plain-dressed woman and said with a smile, "Come, let me see exactly how strong you are." As soon as he finished speaking, his palm suddenly opened, and a thick ancient book suddenly appeared in his hand. Chen Tian looked at the woman in the plain dress and smiled. "Do you dare to enter the book and fight with us?" The woman in the plain dress looked at the ancient book. The title of the book was Book Realm. The plainly dressed woman nodded. "All right." As soon as she finished speaking, she transformed into a ray of sword light and entered the book. The Book Realm. "You're wasting my time." As soon as she finished speaking, she lightly snapped her fingers. A ray of sword light appeared. Chi 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 chi. The four demon beasts directly stopped on the spot. Very soon, the four demon beasts became illusory and disappeared. At the same time, the eyes of the four old men nearby were wide open. There was fear in their eyes, and there was a sword mark on their throats. Instant kill. Not far away, Chen Tian stared at the woman in the plain dress. At this moment, his fists were already clenched tightly. The woman in the plain dress looked around and said softly, "This so-called book realm is barely passable. At least, Master's idea is very interesting. As for power..." At this point she looked at Chen Tian. "You want to use this thing to kill me? May I ask, are you retarded?" Chen Tian suddenly smiled. "Don't worry, there's more." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly formed a seal with both hands, and a moment later he suddenly roared, "Destroy!" Boom! A bookshelf suddenly exploded behind Chen Tian, and then a dark red destroy character floated out. The moment this destroy character appeared, the entire book realm actually trembled slightly. It was too powerful. The woman in the plain dress looked at the destroy character. At this moment, Shintian suddenly roared, "Go!" However, the destroy character only trembled and did not move. Shintian was stunned. What's going on? At this moment, the woman in the plain dress suddenly said, "Come here." The destroy character hesitated for a moment before it directly floated to the woman in the plain dress. It was trembling. Fear. Seeing this scene, Shintian's hands began to tremble. The woman in the plain dress glanced at the destroy character in front of her. A character has cultivated a spirit, and it is an extreme destruction spirit. This is rare. I will find a new master for you, how about it? The destroy character trembled slightly. It moved. The woman in the plain dress was expressionless. Not willing. The destroy character suddenly trembled violently. The woman in the plain dress nodded. It's good that you are willing. Follow him well, and in the future, I will give you a good fortune. After saying that, she directly kept the destroy character. Then, she looked at Shintian. Are there any other treasures? Shintian stared at the woman in the plain dress. Why? The woman in the plain dress said. You mean this character has a spirit? Shintian said. Yes. The woman in the plain dress smiled. Because it is smarter than you. As she said that, she suddenly looked behind Shintian to the right. She slightly frowned, and with the point of her finger, a ray of sword light directly slashed at the bookshelf. Boom! A powerful force burst forth from the bookshelf. Soon a golden word break floated out. The woman in the plain dress looked at the golden destroy character and said, Come here. The destroy character trembled slightly, but it did not go over. The woman in the plain dress squinted her eyes. An array of sword light flew out from her eyes. In the distance, the destroy character directly exploded and turned into ashes. Seeing this scene, Shintian, who was not far away, had a face full of shock. You. As for the woman in the plain dress, the blood-red destroy character in her hand, it was trembling in fear. The woman in the plain dress looked at Shintian, and Shintian's body gradually became illusory. Doppelganger. This was also his doppelganger. His main body did not come down, and he did not dare to come down, because his main body still needed to guard the Myriad Dimensions Academy. The woman in the plain dress suddenly said, Originally, the life and death of this four-dimensional universe had nothing to do with me. However, since my brother chose to save this four-dimensional universe, then, as she said that, she walked in front of Shintian and looked at Shintian. From now on, this four-dimensional universe is under my protection. Go back and tell the people of the fifth dimension that you can come at me. If you use 2 moves, it will be my loss. After saying that, she disappeared, and the book realm disappeared together with her. In the battlefield, Shintian was silent, and his body became more and more illusory. He knew that they had seriously underestimated the woman's strength. But here came the question. Just how strong was she? Even the book realm left by his teacher could not do anything to this woman. How strong was she? There was no answer. Soon Shintian completely disappeared. In the starry sky, the woman in the plain dress looked at the thick book realm in her hand. Find him and follow him. In the future, I will give you a fortune. The book realm slightly trembled, then turned into a ray of black light, and disappeared into the horizon. Looking at the book realm at the end of the starry sky, the woman in the plain dress was silent for a moment. Then she turned and left. In the starry sky, the woman in the plain dress slowly walked. Her figure became smaller and smaller at the end of the starry sky, looking somewhat lonely. In a certain academy, in a pavilion, a middle-aged man suddenly opened his eyes. Shintian. It was not a doppelganger, but his main body. Shintian got up and walked to the side. He lowered his head and looked at the pool in front of him. After a moment he smiled. Do you think I'm scared? Even my teacher didn't dare to call himself invincible in the past. What ability do you have? As he said that, he slowly closed his eyes. Don't you want to fight? Then I will have a good fight with you. Pass down the order to arrest Yi Xian. Chapter 853. The Four-Dimensional Universe. After Yi Xian left the dual realm sky, he returned to the northern region. Yi Xian immediately went to the Moat clan. The Moat clan had now moved to Tianjiang City. They had their own territory in Tianjiang City. The Moat clan was developing well, and was considered a tyrant in Tianjiang City. Seeing Yi Xian, the great elder of the Moat clan quickly came out and bowed. King Yi. Yi Xian said softly, Senior, you don't have to be so polite. Take me to a quiet place. The great elder nodded. Follow me, King Yi. Soon, the great elder brought Yi Xian to a hall in the Moat clan. There was only Yi Xian and him in the hall. Yi Xian opened his palm, and the soul-suppressing sword appeared in his hand. The soul-suppressing sword trembled slightly, and Emosia's soul floated out. At this moment, Emosia's soul had condensed a lot, and was much stronger than before. Seeing Yi Xian, Emosia smiled. Did you win? Yi Xian nodded. For the time being. Emosia said softly. For the time being. Yi Xian said. Brother Emosia, don't worry about this for now. Your priority now is to rebuild your body as soon as possible. Emosia nodded. All right. Be careful. Yi Xian patted Emosia's shoulder lightly and turned to leave. After Yi Xian left, the great elder said in a deep voice. It's very serious, right? Emosia nodded. The great elder hesitated for a moment and said. You are the hope of our clan. Emosia said softly. I know. But sometimes there are many things that have to be done. Saying this, he looked at the great elder. Uncle, I know what you are thinking. But have you ever thought about the reason why our Moat clan could come this far? The great elder said. Because of King Yi. Emosia nodded. The reason our clansmen have a place to live is because of Brother Yi. As for us, we shouldn't only think about our own benefits. If Brother Yi falls, when the nest is overturned, how can the eggs remain intact? The grand elder shook his head. Uncle, I was being selfish. Emosia nodded slightly and said softly. This time my physical body being destroyed is not entirely a bad thing. The great elder hurriedly said. What's wrong? Emosia slowly closed his eyes. At this moment, a shadow suddenly appeared above his soul. Seeing this scene, the grand elder was stunned for a moment before saying in shock. This is the ancestor. After Yi Xian left the Moat clan, he returned to Tianjiang City. In a large hall, Yi Xian gathered the experts of the Black-Yellow Great World. The Xianyuan clan patriarch, the Black-Yellow Master, and the others were all present. Yi Xian looked at the crowd. I believe everyone has heard about the dual realm sky. That's right. Now that the fifth dimension's restriction has been lifted, people from the fourth dimension can go to the fifth dimension, and experts from the fifth dimension should be able to come to the fourth dimension. Hearing this, the people present were a little excited. The fifth dimension. Not only did the experts from the dual realm sky want to go to the fifth dimension, but the experts from the Black-Yellow Great World also wanted to go to the fifth dimension. That was a whole new universe. Yi Xian glanced at the crowd. Everyone, it is best to temporarily give up on the idea of going to the fifth dimension, because they are not friendly. The crowd was silent. Yi Xian said again. The fifth dimension is not friendly. At this moment, the Black-Yellow Master suddenly said. King Yi, was the black gas from before caused by the fifth dimension? Yi Xian nodded. Hearing this, the Black-Yellow Master's face darkened. Do they want to destroy our fourth dimension? Yi Xian said in a low voice. They did have this idea before. The Black-Yellow Master looked at Yi Xian. King Yi, did you stop them? Yi Xian nodded. The Black-Yellow Master looked deeply at Yi Xian. King Yi's strength is unfathomable. The crowd also looked at Yi Xian. They had to admit that the current Yi Xian was becoming more and more unfathomable. Yi Xian said, Today, I called everyone here to tell you about the current situation between our fourth dimension and the fifth dimension. I believe everyone knows that the strength of our fourth dimension is definitely weaker than that of the fifth dimension. Therefore, now that the fifth dimension's restriction has been lifted, it is not a good thing for us. Also, I hope that everyone can understand one thing. Don't even think about going to the fifth dimension. If you go now, you will be sending yourself to death. Of course, if anyone wants to go, I won't stop you. He knew that going to the fifth dimension was an irresistible temptation for many people. If he forcefully stopped them, some people might think that he was obstructing their future. No one in the hall spoke. Yi Xian continued. Now that the fifth dimension's restriction has been lifted, the experts of the fifth dimension may enter the fourth dimension at any time. Therefore, our current situation is not particularly good. Especially now, the people of the black-yellow great world may be unstable. At this time, we need everyone to work together to stabilize the situation. We can't be the first to panic before others come. The black-yellow master nodded. What King Yi said makes sense. We can't be the first to panic. Yi Xian said. We will be very busy from now on. Everyone please leave. The crowd in the hall bowed slightly to Yi Xian, and then left. However, the black-yellow master did not leave. The black-yellow master walked in front of Yi Xian, and looked at Yi Xian. If they really want to destroy our fourth dimension, will we be able to resist? Yi Xian was silent. This was because he could not answer this question. Right now he was only facing the Myriad Dimensions Academy. However, he was very clear that the Myriad Dimensions Academy was not the only one in the fifth dimension. There were definitely countless other forces, and these forces were very likely to become his enemies. Yi Xian said softly, I don't know. However, don't worry. If they only target me, Yi Xian, Yi Xian, will bear all the consequences. I will not implicate the fourth dimension. The black-yellow master was silent. She could see things further. She knew that there was only one possibility for the fifth dimension to not plunder or conquer the fifth dimension. They had come for the treasure of the fifth dimension. Simply put, the target of the experts of the fifth dimension should be Yi Xian, not the entire fourth dimension. Of course, she did not know that if not for Yi Xian being in the fourth dimension, the fourth dimension would have long ceased to exist. After a while the black-yellow master left. In the palace, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Breakthrough. After he had swallowed Chun Tian's sword, he had already absorbed the entire sword's power. He did not know what sword it was, but he had to say that it was really a great supplement. Now, he needed some time to comprehend it. What was life-breaking? In the palace, Yi Xian was deep in thought. Outside the palace, in a certain courtyard, there were two women sitting in front of a stone table. They were Enlancio and Xiaoqi. Beside them, there was a woman leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. She had a blade of grass in her mouth. Lian Wanli, now the most monstrous geniuses of the northern region's younger generation, other than Mo Xie and Yi Xian, were all here. Xiaoqi picked up the teacup on the stone table and took a sip. Then she said, What do you think? Enlancio did not speak. Lian Wanli shrugged his shoulders. I can. What do you think? Those fellows from the fifth dimension obviously want little Ye's life. Enlancio nodded. Not only do they want to seize the treasure, they want to kill him. Xiaoqi placed down the teacup and said softly, I think that we can't just sit there and wait for death. At the side, Lian Wanli's brows rose up. You want to counterattack? Xiaoqi said indifferently. Why not? Enlancio suddenly said, Sure. Xiaoqi glanced in the direction of Yi Xian's room. He has quite a lot of fortuitous encounters, and is getting stronger and stronger. If we follow by his side, the gap between us will get bigger and bigger. I don't want to look up to him in the future. As she spoke, she looked at Lian Wanli and Enlancio. Let's go. The corners of Lian Wanli's mouth curled up. That is exactly what I want. Xiaoqi looked at Enlancio. Enlancio said, Sure. Xiaoqi said, Let's go. Lian Wanli suddenly said, Do you want to say goodbye? Xiaoqi said indifferently, There is no need. Let's go. As soon as she finished speaking, she walked towards the distance. Enlancio glanced in the direction of Yi Xian, and then followed. Lian Wanli shrugged. Let's go then. Very quickly, the three girls vanished into the distance. They left in a carefree manner, and didn't bid farewell to anyone. On the city wall, Shengguan Xiener and Jiang Jiu looked at the three girls who vanished into the horizon. Jiang Jiu said softly, I envy them. Shengguan Xiener nodded. The talents of Xiaoqi and the other two weren't weaker than Yi Xian at all. Before this, they had always been by Yi Xian's side. It could be said that their light was overshadowed by Yi Xian. If one disregarded Yi Xian, one would realize that they were actually very outstanding. Now the three of them decided to go on their own. Obviously, they didn't want to be affected by Yi Xian anymore. Contrast. Simply speaking, the three of them didn't want to be Yi Xian's contrast. At this time Jiang Jiu chuckled. They can leave, but we can't, and we don't dare to leave. Now the northern region needed her and Shangguan Xianer very much, because the entire black-yellow Great World's affairs were handled by her and Shangguan Xianer. And Yi Xian was completely a hands-off shopkeeper. If they left, Yi Xian would definitely be badly battered. Moreover, the two of them didn't have the strength of Shaoqi and the other two. If they left the black-yellow Great World, it would be very dangerous, not to mention going to the fifth dimension. At this time, Shangguan Xianer suddenly said, "Do you want to go to the fifth dimension to have a look?" Jiang Jiu smiled. "Of course. The fifth dimension." As she spoke, she looked up at the end of the horizon and said softly, "I don't know if I have the chance to go in this life." Shangguan Xianer was about to speak, but at this moment, the two girls suddenly disappeared. Soon, the two girls appeared in front of a large hall. And in front of the hall stood a man. It was Yi Xian. Jiang Jiu quickly walked in front of Yi Xian and said softly, "You broke through?" Yi Xian shook his head. This time, he wasn't able to break through to the life-breaking realm. Just a little bit more. Jiang Jiu nodded slightly. "No rush, take your time." Yi Xian said softly, "I'm going out for a while. I'll have to trouble you here." Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian. "Where are you going?" Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. "To find help." After saying that, he directly turned into a sword light and disappeared at the end of the horizon. In the same place, Jiang Jiu said softly, "Say, who do you think he's going to find?" P.S. Recently, the weather has been getting colder and colder. If you're not careful, you'll catch a cold. Brothers, make sure to keep warm. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.